Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and warm welcome everybody to our council meeting for Wednesday, the 12th of February 2025. Acknowledge people in the gallery and online. Before we go to our order of business, I'd like to ask the Deputy Mayor to open with karakia.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, o te rā tēnā tātou katoa. Greetings to everyone who's here today. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haume, huie, tae ki e. And just as a translation for those that might not know, come forth from above, below, within, and from the environment, vitality and well-being, and for all. And may we be strengthened in unity. Lord Reira tēnā koutou. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Right, in terms of this morning or today, the meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, in the unlikely event of an emergency, we will exit through the green signs which we entered. We'll evacuate to the assembly area, which is the clock tower in the square Te Maraehine. It's a non-smoking facility. The toilets are in the link span, again, as you entered. Unlikely event of needing a defibrillator, that is located on the ground floor and outside the customer services. Any incidences, please report those to our committee administration here. Okay, to staff and any presenters, if you could just in the first instance mention your name and title, just for those that are listening online, and we have Councillor Millard online. Okay, we'll go to our order of business, and number 2 is their apologies, and we have an apology to be received from Councillor Finlay and for late arrival, Councillor Johnson. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We will vote, please. And that has passed 14 votes for and none against. All right. Councillors, you'd be aware that we've got the Local Water Done Well consultation document that came to us late. So we will have to accept that as an additional item, just in terms of process, and that's subject to the Local Government Act, and the reason for the lateness is seeking changes to the draft CD 1 working day prior to the publishing of this agenda, and it's enabling some separation between the Local Water Done Well and the annual budget consultations. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no comments, we will vote, please. And that has passed 14 votes for and none against. All right. Declarations of interest. I don't believe there are any declarations of interest, nothing from the floor. Okay. Public comment, again, I haven't received any, and I don't think there's any public comment from the gallery. In terms of number 6, presentation from University at the 11th hour, that's just been withdrawn till the April meeting, just in terms of availability of material, etc. So I agreed with the foundation that it's better that they come fully prepared to talk to us rather than perhaps just a two-stage approach. So we'll hear their exciting plans in April. All right, number 7 is around minutes, confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the 5th of February 2025, Part 1 public and Part 2 confidential. We'll take those together unless people want them separated, and I'll confirm them as being a true and correct record. I'll move them, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? That being none, we will vote, please. That has passed 13 votes for and 1 abstention. All right, we move through now to our local water done well consultation document for approval. I'll invite again to the table Julie, Mike, Olivia, if she's here, and Scott. And this is the separate late paper that you'll have, councillors. Kia ora, welcome, team.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Monaghan aho. Thank you, Your Worship and Councillors. Happy to just hand over to Liv, who will take us through the changes to the document from last week. Thank you.
Good morning. I guess just to summarise the key changes that you all have noticed from looking at it is we have made all of your recommendations. They've now been merged into the CD. Especially highlighting the fact that the numbers now exclude inflation. We will have all of the numbers that include inflation in the modelling report on our website, so people are able to have a look at that. Option 2, you'll notice, has had a bit of a rework, and just to make it a bit clearer for our community. And the third point I just wanted to point out is while a big part of the legislation is making sure that the pros and cons of an option are really well detailed, and while we had that in the content of the option before, we've pulled that out just to make it a bit more obvious for our community to be able to see. We did add a few in there. I'm not going to summarise anything else. All the other changes are in that table of changes for you to read, and if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. And just lastly, we are confident that we will be able to start consultation if you choose to adopt today on the 27th of February, so that's only 1 week later than what we'd originally planned. Still allows a 2-week period before the annual budget consultation starts, and also means that we could still leverage some of our community and city events for the engagement period. Scott?
Cool. Morning team. As Liv said, we've removed inflation from all the numbers in the consultation document, and in line with the resolution around the Nature Calls Levy, option 3 has that additional 1,000 included as well. So round numbers in this consultation document. As I talked about last week, the model is not that precise, so the rounding of numbers allows for a little bit of movement when things actually occur in that point. It's not trying to hide the true costs of things, it's just trying to round to provide a little bit more of movement as the organisation, if it's a new organisation, is set up. Option 2, with the best and worst case scenario, there's about 75 combinations of council-controlled organisations across that cluster. So naturally, we haven't put all of those combinations in the consultation document, otherwise we'd have a document longer than the long-term plan. So we've banded that one up, and the best case scenario would need a combination of 4 or 5 councils for that to occur. So that's the way that the wording and Liv has said in the rewrite there as well. The worst case scenario is a 2-council CCO, so that shows the extremities of the combination in that option. And probably just one other thing to note is those numbers exclude GST as well. That comes through the modelling because the inputs are all excluding GST from the budget side of things. And probably while I've got the microphone, big thanks to Liv and the marketing team and the designers about the work they've put in over the last 3 or 4 days to get it back this quickly in this format. It's been a huge effort from that team. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Mahapara.
Thank you, and I want to say well done for getting it back to us this fast. It's been amazing. My question's around consultation. What will it look like to the public? Will it be in this form of this document, or will it be on the website? Will we produce 90,000, 120,000 of these books? How much will it cost to produce these books? Will we have these sit-down meetings with the public? Just a bit more about the consultation process.
Sure. the consultation process will look similar to what we did with the LTP. This is just as significant of a decision for our community. We will have the full consultation document available at all of our libraries and our customer service centre, and we're also happy to print it out for people who might want the hard copy themselves. It will be replicated entirely on our website as well. Roughly around 95% of submissions come in via the website. And we're working on what that looks like to make sure that people, I guess, have to read really important information rather than just, before they can move on to the next step. Every property will get a booklet which will summarise the key points of the consultation and encourage them to come and find out more. We will have sector sessions with the community groups. We will have it with the environment groups and our water customers and business. We will also come and talk to all of the reference groups and other sector lead type organisations. We will have about 6 or 7 drop-in sessions at our community libraries and our customer service centre for people to come and ask questions. We are also happy, like with any other consultation, if people have questions that we can jump on a phone or go and meet with them and talk them through stuff a bit more. We will have a presence at some of our big events, and we're also looking at doing a specific potential event really focused on the local water done well consultation.
So just going back to your point, you said you'll produce books to go into the letterboxes, not this full book.
Yeah, the cost of that would be phenomenal. So, and also, I guess what we are trying to do by getting information out to the homes is to really make people realise this is a big decision. And what's really important with when we try and inform the community is that they have multiple touch points. So they'll get something there, then they might hear something on the radio, and then they might see something in the newspaper, and then they might have someone at work talk about it. So all of these different touch points help, and will also help drive people to read that full document.
So it'll be a summary.
Yep, just like how we do with annual budgets and the LTP, the little booklet that goes out to the homes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Isabellan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I have 2 questions, and they just came because as I was reading through the document, I was thinking what questions might come to me, and one which I just wanted to unpick is on page 32 of our papers, which is page 25 of the consultation document, and it's the pros and cons. And under climate change mitigation, we've said with the advantage of scale, improved efficiencies and an increase in borrowing capacity, more climate change mitigation could be likely. And what I was wondering is that we're not planning to do anything extra, is that we wouldn't have already planned to do in our LTP, are we? Is that solely kind of relating to the scale and funding?
Yes, so we sought advice from our climate change team, and I guess the word could is really important there. So a water organisation with potentially more money could do something, but they could also choose not to. However, they would have, I guess, more ability to potentially do things than what we would have in option 3, for example.
So that could be additional to what they might receive through an SOE in their member councils that would have the volition to do that.
They could choose to do that, yeah.
Great, thank you. And the other question that I had was related to the water meters, and there's a little sentence in there which says it being the legislation, allows for charge to be applied to properties not connected to the network but within the service area to reflect the cost of maintaining that service. And I anticipated quite a lot of questions about that particular sentence, and I wondered if there was anything you could give us to start with for that particular bit of the legislation.
I don't think there's any changes from the way we currently operate. That's exactly how we work now, Councillor.
Great, thank you. That's all from me. Thanks very much.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, team. Just one from me. I just wanted to ask about the new question for the submission form around allowing people to write in councils included in this document or others. Hypothetically, say we had 200 people write in that they really want us to work with Hawke's Bay, for example. It's not like at the end of that process we could just decide, oh, we're going to form a CCO with the Hawke's Bay because we had submissions on it. So what are we trying to achieve by asking that question?
I guess in short, it gives you the community mandate to have that conversation with Hawke's Bay if they wanted to.
But just to be clear, legally, we would have to run another consultation process if we decided, 30 people wrote in South Taranaki and we decided we were going to go with them, we would have to then undertake another process to do that.
Yes.
So I guess my question is it really worth opening that can of worms when we've got 3 options in front of us? Is it worth is there any real value in asking that question given it's not something we can deliver on?
I think, and maybe we need to explain the question better in the submission form, but it was also with that option 2, where there is that variety of councils, are there ones in that grouping that they particularly see some good synergies with?
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just on that, Liv or whoever else wants to take this, and the CE might want to take it too. So the entity would always, and it's following on from Councillor Wood's questions, so the entity isn't locked down to X, Y, Z councils in time, saying 2-3 years' time, the South Taranakis or the Hawke's Bays come knocking on the door. We're not locked. The door's not locked, is it? We're open to.
Yeah, that's correct, Your Worship.
And we'd still have to go through the appropriate sort of consultation, but it would allow that conversation to exist.
Yes, certainly. In the initial stage of the CCO and the Constitution, we would be including mechanisms within that to allow that conversation to occur.
Because I can see this probably going in that way eventually, once things are set up. Okay. All right. The C desperately wants to speak.
Yeah, just to say, good people come from South Taranaki. Just for elected members, info as well, over and above the consultation with the community, we're going to be doing, looking to get elected members across the preferred councils and preferred option together as well. Also presentations from people that more detail about what economic regulation might look like, what regulation might look like through Te Mata Arawai and the like as well, just so that you're well and truly informed by the time you get to making a decision in around May.
Thanks, Wade. That's a good point, because, the 50-odd decision makers between the preferred option councils probably do need to talk and meet amongst each other as well. The mayors have and the deputy mayor have, but I don't think the others have, so it would be good to do that. We talk to neighbours, but I couldn't tell you who the councillors are in Kapiti, so it'd be good to know who they are and their thoughts along with your thoughts towards them. So, okay. Well, thank you to the team. If I again, like Councillor Harper, to thank you so much for the work that you've done. I understand there was a bit of midnight oil over the weekend, so I appreciate the efforts that especially comms and marketing team have done, but also others getting into the work. So I'm happy to recommend that the council adopt the consultation, local water done well, CD or consultation document attachment 1, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Again, just thank you to everybody involved. I think we said last week that we're getting forced into this. It's very much having to do this in the time frames. If we had more time, we'd be doing a lot more, I suppose, pre-work and talking to different people, but it is what it is, and in some ways it's good to bring out some of the numbers and the potential, I suppose, pros and acknowledging what the cons are as well with the options that are there. So I'll open it up for any other commentary. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Enjoyed listening to the debate and comments on last week, and I might hold my thoughts until this point of having a revised document in front of us. To start with, indeed, the consultation document is exceptionally well presented, and all credit to the team that's done the document and the work behind it. Unfortunately, I can only describe that document as a valiant attempt to dress up a very sad state of affairs. This very much needs a warning label for the community, right front and center on this. And it should say, more debt, less control. Because that's actually what we potentially, as a council, are endorsing and encouraging our community to accept. More debt, less control. Double out from 250 to 500 and push a CCO out with at least 3 other councils in the mix. The tagline around the whole thing, local water done well, is one of the most untrue statements that I have ever seen promulgated into the community. It is regional water done to us. That is the simple fact. The irony, of course, is that when you say, well, if it's done to us by who? Well, our dear friends in central government. And for those of you that have been listening to what's been coming out of Wellington, it's a fair amount of scolding us into focusing on roads and pipes. Well, here's the irony. With the other hand, we're being told you have to let go of the pipes. So what's the actual agenda around local communities here and local voice and local democracy and localism, full stop? My questions for this are well beyond the scope of what's going to happen to the water. It's what's going to happen to communities, communities' voice, and local government, full stop. Government's got some incredibly bright people working very, very hard to ignore the fact that there has been no central government investment into the water space, and that there is an absolute paucity of public investment under local control, slowly starving away. The current process we're in started with a great illusion of choice. I mean, we just heard about the 75 options that we could put in there. The reality is, when you actually look at it, there's almost no choice within what is being put to the community. The option rising to the top, and on modeled numbers only, I might say, is an untested regional entity to deliver this community's most essential service, which is water. Now, I well accept that the chickens are coming home to roost in terms of far too much investment for far too long, zero government investment, but the solution is not some regional structure that's supposed to borrow its way to success, while we have very little control over it. So I usually do, at the point of consultation, sit back and say, let's just wait and see what the community says. But this needs fair warning, and we need to make sure the community is well aware of what is being pushed on them and who is doing the pushing. So I, for one, will not be voting to support this consultation document going out, because I cannot in good faith say to this community, you should do this. All I can say to them is, you should not. Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I totally disagree with Councillor Barrett. I think the officers, under a lot of pressure, have put this document together under guidance of us as councillors last week, and they've done a very, very good job, and I commend them as officers for the hard work that they have done under the last week, under the guidance of the Chief Executive. I think the option they've put forward is the third option, working with Horowhenua, Manawatu and Kapiti with us, is the best option for us as City Council, and I think it is the best option going forward. I do have concerns about the consultation process, and that's why my questions were targeted on the consultation process, and I do think that that is what we should be focusing on. I've had questions put to me by people in the community about that consultation process, and if we have to spend a bit more money making sure it's done well, then we should be spending that money to make sure it is done well. We are here to talk to our community about water, and this is our biggest decision, and we should be doing it well in a consultation process. We can't ask anyone to get any more money from anywhere else, because there's nowhere else to go to get more money. This is it, where the buck stops with us, and we've got to get on with it and go with the best solution we can possibly do as councillors for our people in our community. And that's what we should be doing right now. This is the option we've been put forward to us, and I think we should be supporting it going forward. So well done for the work that you've put to us. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a chance to comment briefly, because I have been vocal on this issue through the process, but I would just want to concur with much of what Councillor Barrett has said, and we would sit on different ends of this political spectrum, and it's just not a view of the left. I would say a view wanting to voice quite clearly from the right is that this is a process that I'm very uncomfortable with, and here we are consulting with our community before we even have a chance to meet our neighbours, and the pace of it is just so unfortunate. And the idea of regional water done to us, I think, is an apt name for the process, and say that we're going to get an outcome, I think, is still questionable. And so in light of, you know, being done to us, I think that's a very unfortunate outcome. Where we are with the consultation document, I think it does very clearly steer only into one direction with the modelling. And again, I think that is so unfortunate. Credit to the staff. I don't want to say any reflection on our staff. I think the staff have been outstanding to present the information they've had at hand and to disseminate it for us to get some understanding with the updates that have come out of central government. But totally my key point here is the concern of the lack of information, the time of pace that we're moving, and the unfortunate nature that government haven't put 1 cent necessarily into a future proposal of us doing it ourselves, and we've been doing it pretty well to date anyway. So, no, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along similar lines to Dennison and Councillor Barrett, I also am really concerned about what we're being forced to do here. I do acknowledge the work done by officers, and I think they've done a really great job of listening to the feedback last week and incorporating that. And I particularly appreciate the added explanation around affordability. But what we are producing for our community are 3 options, all of which many of our community will not consider as affordable. And for that reason, I'm not going to repeat what has already been said, but as I also said last week, I'm really uncomfortable with us having to go and have a conversation with the community about something that we are not driving, we are not supportive of. So I will also not be supporting this.
Councillor Sabellin.
Thank you. My thanks to the staff as well. What a mammoth effort. And thank you to Councillor Barrett for perfectly articulating my thoughts on where local government is headed generally under this government's leadership. But I'm not going to reiterate what I said last week. What I have today is a plea to all my fellow elected members that we all show up to the best of our ability throughout this consultation, that we put our faces out there, that we put our feet to the ground, and we have as many personal conversations as we can. We need to be at all of these drop-ins. We need to be seeking opportunities to talk to communities. We need to do some real mahi on the ground to be able to have this complicated conversation, because we do have different views, but what is in this consultation document is going to be alarming for many in our community, and we already have trust issues. This is our opportunity to, actually go out there and front it. We don't support where this is going. This is the situation we're in, and just be real about it. But to have our bodies there at these drop-ins, at these community events, whatever we're going to do, we all need to be there showing up. So please, there's 16 of us, we can spread out. We can be at all of these things. We can be talking on our social media. We can be as vocal as we possibly can about what the implications of this situation is for our water, for the future, but for where local government is headed. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. And I largely agree with the comments that have been made previously around some of the flaws in this whole system. In particular, I want to highlight the time frame that we're under. When the previous government initiated change in water over 3 years, there was lots of complaints from councils across the country that that was far too short, that the time frame of 3 years was ridiculously small and undoable. And yet here we are with the next government with 1 year, in fact less than a year by the time we find out about everything that has to be in it, a lot less than a year, to negotiate with other councils, to consult with the community. The time frame is just too short. It's unrealistic, and it's resulting in our community having to take decisions without having full information. I don't think that's acceptable for a start. The second thing is, and I slightly disagree with Councillor Isabella on this is a government agenda. I'm not very keen to go out and put my face to this. This isn't what I think is best for our community. Why should I be out telling the community that, well, here's what we think you should do for the best? I don't think any of this is for the best, actually. So I'm reluctant to be used as the face of this when I think government should be doing the consultation, since it's a government-induced change. So I have some concerns about that. Thirdly, this is in a way a Clayton's consultation. There's an illusion of choice, certainly, but in actual fact, the cards are stacked against some choices. So if we wanted as a council to maintain control over our water infrastructure and to alone, our borrowing is limited, much more limited than it would be if we went in with other councils. So how is that a genuine choice that's been presented to the community? It's not. So I really feel that this whole thing is being rushed, that it's being pushed through with a political agenda. I didn't think everything was perfect about Three Waters either, I might say, but I'm surprised that the voices that were raised against Three Waters are not now being raised against this, because this is much worse. Much worse. It's not going to have the economies of scale that Three Waters had. It's not going to have the input by iwi. How is this better? It's a lot worse. So I'm going to support the consultation document because I understand that legally we have to consult and we have to have a water services plan in action, but, you know, by September. But I don't think it's a good option, any of it, for our community. And I'm not very keen to go out pushing it and say that this is what we should be doing, because I don't think it is. So I'll just appeal to those of you who are very, very vocal against Three Waters. How does this measure up? You know, and I commend those councillors who have spoken out against it. I think it's important that we do speak up. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. This is about what's best for our community.
Councillor Megan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I was sort of two ways on this. I believe we need to consult. That we have to do. We're really for no option. Our members out there, the public out there, don't know anything about it anyway. So we've got to start that conversation, and consultation will do that. I do agree with a lot of what's been said. The government need to own this. And I haven't seen them putting their hands in their pocket to pay for all the bits and pieces that go with it. So it's pretty sad, and I don't know how we go about voicing that, but we need to make it quite clear to the government they've stepped out of line here, well out of line, and just deciding they're going to local government. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I haven't said a lot about this issue going through the consultation process over the last few months because I've appreciated councillors have wanted to express their frustration with the process in the chamber and haven't seen any value in me expressing my support, given at the end of the day the same result will go through, that we have to do a consultation. But to be incredibly clear, Three Waters was a process where our community lost $1 billion worth of assets to a faceless, nameless regional entity. I don't know if you've read this plan, but our community maintains ownership of these assets. And I would go through all of this pain, which I appreciate is not an ideal process. I absolutely agree. I wish government said, here's $100 million to invest in your water or $1 billion. But that's not the reality that we find ourselves in. So I would go through all of this pain 10 times over to maintain $1 billion of assets for our community and our people that we have built up and paid for over years. So that is the difference, and that is why, although I accept it is not ideal, I accept it would be better with more money and more time and more of everything else, it is what it is. And I think we will end up with a far better option. When councillors say they don't think this is a good choice for our community, what's the alternative? Option 3 in here talks about $3,800 a year as the cost to our community versus $2,100 going down to $1,400 over time. The point of this is that we receive long-term benefits over achieving scale by working with our other councils in our communities. There is significant long-term benefit to doing this. So I just want to put a bit of positivity in the conversation. It is not all negative. The numbers in this document actually show that there is incredible value in going down this process for each and every single one of our ratepayers in our community. So I hope the report that doesn't come out of today is that council hates this and thinks we shouldn't be doing it. There is absolutely good value in going through this process, and I am more than happy to stand in front of our community and say this is going to save you money in the long term by working with our neighbours in an entity that your council owns, rather than a faceless, nameless regional one. And I find it challenging to sit here and listen to the councillors who are more than willing to sell all of our assets to a nameless regional government-owned entity, but aren't willing to work with our neighbours on forming a CCO and delivering these water assets. So that is why I haven't said a lot, because I appreciate you won't all agree with my opinion, and at the end of the day, it doesn't change the process, but I want to put it on record that I am fully in support of going into this consultation process, and I look forward to the benefits that our community will get from these locally owned CCOs.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, for what's always interesting when we get into the water space. And I don't particularly agree with Councillor Wood, but I do agree with many of the other comments that have been expressed. I wasn't planning to speak. We have to go out for consultation on this. It's a legally required process. But I feel the frustration in the room, and I wonder if there's something we can do about that. So, Mr Mayor, I wondered if I could move an additional recommendation that the Mayor and CE write to the Minister to express the concerns that have been expressed in this chamber about the process and the timeline that we're in. And it might be a pointless exercise, but if we don't tell somebody, we're just whistling in the wind. I can't see the point of all the hot air in this chamber if we don't send that somewhere. So Councillor Barrett's indicated he'd be happy to second that motion, that the Mayor and CE write to the Minister to express the concerns as have been put forward in the chamber over the last 2 debates on this matter. I think there is some commonality in that. I don't think we're talking about the rights and wrongs of local water done well per se. Our concerns are about the timing, the framing of the consultation, and the reality of the choice that's in front of our community. To me, that seems to balance the decision we have to make with the concerns that we've expressed. So I'll put that up and see if members would support that, please. Do you need me to write that, Hannah, or have you got my intention? Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I've got to say that I feel very akin to what Councillor Johnson has said and many others of my colleagues around here. I don't agree with Councillor Wood, and I want to say I find it very foreign as a Māori to think that water or the awa is owned. It should be for all of us. It's not owned. You'll never sell it anyway. Even if it sounds owned, we'll never sell it, would we? God forbid. But this is huge. And people have been asking me about it, and I feel like saying, buckle in. Because once we come out with this kind of thing, we're going to have this huge tsunami of concern, angst, anger, and I do think we have to go out for consultation, or else we're going to be non-compliant, and the auditor will put a few things down, and our heads will be spinning. I do want to thank the team. What a wonderful team we have. We've probably got the best team in the country who have worked on this. Ngā mihi ngā koutou. But wow, you know, this is, I think I've got to put it out there. However, I'm not happy, and I will be happy to do what Councillor Isabella said and stand out there and say, oh, don't hate on us. But we actually don't, well, I don't. I'm not going to speak for others who do support it. I don't support this. I feel that the process is flawed, and because the process is flawed, we're not doing good service, due diligence or service to our community, to our nation. Nō reira tēnā koe, kia ora.
All right, thanks for your comments. Look, I'm quite amazed. Please take your political glasses off. I'm quite shocked with some of the comments. Those that have been around the table know that we've had water issues for some time. So how do you think we're going to get through this? Option 3, very, very clear. State loan, everything, massive costs. And that's not just us, that's right in the country. Look, I agree with some of the commentary around the speed, the rush. Yep, it's been done to us in that respect. About the only thing I agree with Councillor Barrett is there's no central government funding, and there should be, and we've always sort of said that. But really, councillors, we do CCOs with other things, with joint partners. Yes, there needs to be a lot more care with this asset, but really, we're elected to make decisions. We've got to consult. So if you don't vote for at least consulting, I think that is quite silly. So look, I do think there are some positives. My understanding, I think I'm right, we still own it collectively in a CCO. There is value. There is value in looking with others. There's a scale game, as Councillor Johnson said. And look, tell me another alternative. I don't know, and I've been here for 10 years. I don't know what the alternative is, other than to look with like-minded communities that are close to us, that have the same communities of interest, that have good assets themselves, as we do, and we do something together, that our community still owns. So I think we're getting a little bit hyped up, and there's a little bit of political stuff bouncing around the room, and I get that, and I understand why you're doing that. But we've got to consult. It really isn't ours either. It is the government's program, but we have to play our role. Otherwise, the alternative is we'll end up like Tauranga, and we'll just be somebody looking in. So please do the right thing. You've got to go out and talk to the community. We've got to put something out to the community. If we don't, then that is absolutely stupid. So if you can please vote on number 1. We'll talk to number 2 in a moment. And that has passed 13 votes for and 1 against. Okay, we'll record it. So that'll be 13 votes for and 2 against. Thank you. All right, number 2. Okay, we've got number 2 there. This is Councillor Bowen's additional recommendation that the Mayor and Chief Executive write to the Minister of Local Government to express the concerns of the Palmerston City Council of local water done well. Councillor, you've spoken to it. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Okay. Oh, sorry, the Deputy Mayor.
Mr Mayor, I was just wondering if we see if this is that we see in other councils? Just a...
That's 7. We can... I just want to say I'm uncomfortable with this at this time. I do wonder, and I won't be voting for it, even as you're asking me to write, but I would like to say in number 11, we have submission on the Local Government Water Services Bill. I think this fits perfectly into that, and I'd be happy to take concerns via that submission. This will be poking the bear big time, and I don't think we've got any, other than you all feeling good about it, any upside to this. In the submission process around the actual water services bill, yeah, we can have a go. So I won't be supporting this, sorry. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do see obviously some value in this, which is why I have seconded it. We've had a string of legislation that has atomized a terrible process down into a number of individual submissions that the minister never sees. What we're talking about here is writing to the minister on behalf of the 90,000 residents in this community today and future residents, to at least leave an artifact for future generations when they look back and go, where did it all go wrong? Well, this will be a nice little artifact they can pick up and see that actually this council had concerns and they articulated those concerns to the appropriate authorities, in this case, the Minister of Local Government. We have a new Minister of Local Government. It would be useful for them to hear from council on this matter, so I'd urge you to support.
Councillor Isabel.
Thank you. I just want to add, I think the benefit of this action is that we show that we will go and bat for our community when we think things are not right. These are reasonable concerns to raise, the specific ones that have been mentioned by Councillor Bowen. And I think on one hand you can go, we do have these concerns, let's take them to the top on behalf of our community because our concerns are that grave. Or you can go, it's futile, it won't make a difference, and it might make people angry. I want the leadership that goes, we don't think it's right, so we will say that we don't think it's right. These things are not well with this process. The submission is excellent. I've been through that with a fine-tooth comb. It is fantastic. But this is directly talking to the Minister on behalf of our community that we have some red flags. And we can stand up and say that. And even if it is futile, at least we have done it and showed our community that we will speak up for them when we think that things aren't well with it.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wondering if I could ask a question of Councillor Bowen. I believe I've heard correctly in your speech, but just to clarify, concerns is quite a broad term. To be clear, we're talking about the concern around time frame and funding. Is that correct, or is it just any concern that's been mentioned today will be put into a letter to the Minister?
Thank you for the question. Concerns is broad, and I trust the Mayor and Chief Executive to accurately reflect the concerns that have been raised in this chamber. I'm not seeking to limit what they might think are concerns that are worth bringing to the Minister's attention.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just a bit concerned here that we're a bit of a Johnny-come-lately. If we were going to write letters complaining about this, we should have been doing it quite some time ago. I don't think much going to change now. They didn't take any notice of anything that we've said or done in the past. I don't see they're going to make any difference. I have no issue with poking the bear. I have no issue with that. Okay, no issue with poking the bear at all. Okay, I'd actually like to do a few other things to the bear besides poking it.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. It's just a process for me that, Your Worship, if you're not going to support this, then how do we vote that we make you do it?
Yep, you make me do it. I've already done it. I've already spoken to them, but we'll do it again. If this succeeds. Okay, write a reply? Okay, all right, we will vote. and that is passed 11 votes for and 4 against. All right. We'll now go through, that's completely done. Okay. All right. We move through to number 8 on our paper, and this is around annual budget, the plan 25-26, and that's date including the draft consultation document and supporting information. I'd like to invite Scott back to the table along with Cameron Mackay and Steve. Thank you. The big part of your papers, page 19 of your papers, councillors, through to 222.
Good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. Pleased to be with you this morning to bring you the next iteration of the budget. What you have in front of you takes into account the decisions that you have made in this budget process, including meetings in December. Just a few things I just want to overview before we get into questions. So, firstly, you'll recall there was a recommendation to consider professional services and transferring $1 million of that into a training development budget. We've taken a look into that, and in Appendix 1, what we've tried to do is outline the types of use that we use that professional services budget for. There is risks entailed in terms of giving effect to that recommendation, and some of those are outlined in that attachment. In terms of where we sit at the current time, so at the moment we're sitting with an increase of 8.5% to the total rates for next year. And just want to note on that though that whilst that is a total rates increase of 8.5%, and you have a paper coming later on around the rating system impacts, because of the valuation changes, there will be differing levels of change for an individual property, so hence why I'm coining it total, increased total rates. In terms of components of what make up that 8.5% in front of you, so we've outlined that in a table in the report, but broadly speaking, 3.5% of the increase relates to funding capital renewal increases and debt repayment and interest, and there's 1.4% sort of broadly funding the change to the transport program, including emissions and the additional footpath renewal that NZTA are no longer funding that portion of. So that's included in there. And as is the additional government regulation costs for Te Mata ROI levy. We're aware as well at the moment that there is a consultation underway around Commerce Commission levy, so that's not currently in here, but the magnitude of that is relatively small, and we'll find a way to. We'll report back to you later on if that proceeds. Just to summarise, you also have a draft consultation document for your consideration, and thanks to our communications team and marketing team who've pulled that together as well.
for us, and I'm happy to take any feedback that you might have around that. Over to you, Mr. Mayor, for any questions.
Thank you, and they're coming in thick and fast. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. The first one is about the two now new levies that government is putting on us to fund their own activity. I just wondered if there was any precedent for this, because we only really found out about the first levy, the $400,000, during a meeting in December. Can you say, in your experience, this sort of thing happened before, where local government's been asked to government initiative?
I'm through, Mr. Mayor. I don't have anything specific to mind, but I'm not suggesting that there hasn't been those experiences. Certainly, when it comes to funding regulated costs, they're using the principle of user pays, the benefactor of the service pays for the regulated cost. I suspect there are some elements of that. Perhaps you could use a reference to some of the MB and brands fees that might be payable on a building consent, for argument's sake, those sorts of things. So there is some examples where that does occur. I guess the thing is these are in consultation currently for a period of enactment from 1 July 2025, so it's quite a compressed time frame in terms of giving effect to that through the budget process. Yeah.
So just to be clear, it's anticipated that we'd be paying $500,000 in levies to the government each year?
Yes.
And what is that levy based on? Is it the number of connections? Is it the population? Presumably it's a pro rata in some way, is it?
They are, so part of the consultation has been around the method of allocation. I believe they've had options that consider both connections and population. I think their preferred method at the moment is based on population.
So, in future years, if they were to increase this levy, would we have any control over that?
That's a good question. I suspect we won't, because it'll be basically setting whatever the cost of the regulator is will be passed through in some method, I would think.
Okay. I'll have some comments about that later. Just going on to the consultation document, you know, the short version that we put out to the public. So on page 10 of that, so page 206 of our agenda papers, there's a few sort of key points of the annual budget. And where it says, except for some transport projects that were cut due to reduced external funding, I wonder if that could be made a bit clearer, that they were cut due to X amount of reduction in funding from government. Because I don't think it's very clear to the community when they see cut due to reduced external funding, where that external funding was coming from. It could have been sponsorship, it could have been grant funding from, you know, charitable organisations. I just think that has had a huge impact on our budget, and you know, you yourself said about the percentage increase in the budget, but it's not really listed as a key point, and so could we make that clearer, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I think we probably could look at the wording there. I think perhaps if we use something to the effect of that, make it clear that there's a link to a government subsidy, perhaps.
Yeah. And again, in the box it says, residents will continue to receive a service, but due to reduced funding from NZTA, the council's had to cut a number of previously proposed transport improvements. I wonder if in there we could put something along the lines of, but council has decided to fully fund pavement upgrades, etc., so that people are aware where we're putting extra money in and what we've considered our priorities, because those are, to my mind, those are key points of the annual budget. They're very different to last year and to what we proposed in the long-term plan.
Yep, that can be done.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Just a couple of things I thought as you were asking those questions. I mean, it is very unusual for ratepayers to fund a government department or service, but we do have the waste levy, which I think is, and also the REM authority, I think, fund as well. But it is unusual that a government department, the ratepayers are asked to fund a government department. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, team. Page 22, table 1 regarding our funding of operating expenses. I see under operating expenses funded through debt, there's been a $900,000 increase to that budget line from 4.2 million to 5.1. Given that we're looking at raising $10 million less debt than we'd previously anticipated, why has there been an increase in the operations funding through debt?
A big component of that will be the Local Water Done Well program that we talked about in December, in terms of funding transition up there.
Thank you. On page 35, our net debt as a percentage of total revenue is anticipated to be around 9% less than what we'd planned for in the long-term plan. But obviously we've, in that long-term plan, agreed to raise additional revenue for early debt repayment. Has that been adjusted to reflect the lower position of debt expectation of council, or are we still anticipating to raise the same amount of additional rates to pay off debt that we're no longer incurring?
If I recall, so you recall in the conversation for the long-term plan, if I recall, that is not kicking in until year 4, I think,
okay,
of the
so there's none at the moment.
plan. Yeah.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask on page 37, our gain on property revaluations, we've got in here 126.4 million. Given most property values across the city have gone down, where's it coming from?
That's of the revaluation, which I think is the roading network in there. So it's not necessarily property in the truest sense there, it's the recognition of those revaluations there, but that's the name that we have to put on the financial statements.
Understood, thank you. And my last question is on page 38 around investment property and our prospective statement of financial position. I see our investment properties reducing in value from 14.2 million to 4.5 million. I assume a portion of this is Tamakuku and a portion of this is the revaluations, but a $10 million drop seems sharper than I would have expected. Is there any explanation as to why that is?
Sorry, Councillor, we probably just have to get back to you as to what that specifically is. There might be a combination of things in there.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks to the both of you. Just starting on page 22, the change from the December draft to now under all other operating expenses is an additional 2.2 million, going from 79.3 to 81.5. I understand 400 of that's been discussed, but I'm just wondering what the rest, the other 1.8 increase since December is.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a few things going on there. There were a couple of other resolutions passed to include budgets. 100,000 for Centrepoint, 120 for street lighting survey, 65,000 for the resource recovery, and an unintended consequence of the reduction to the remuneration budget is that capitalised labour is slightly, the capitalised overhead portion of that is in that line as well. So there's a slight movement in that line, a detail of that wider grouping as well.
And so all of that, is that add up to 1.8 million?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then just moving to page 35, the limit on increase to rates is 7% there, and there's a note underneath as to why that's different. But usually in the past we've had to include an explanation if we're exceeding any of our policy limits. I read what was on page 41, just saying to fund the cost of higher standards and new services. Is there anywhere else, are we required to give an explanation if we've exceeded our policy limits? If so, where would we find that explanation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what you are required to do is you note that you're exceeding the debt limit. You must publish the result, the rates limit, sorry. And typically we would put a footnote, a brief explanation as to broad that what's happening. That's usually brief and high level.
Is that footnote included already, or have I just missed it?
We can add something there.
Okay, thank you. Page 48, there's quite a big increase in a few of these budgets. I'm looking at resource recovery is about a 1.9 million increase on the long-term plan, and also recreation and play is an increase. There's a few there. Do we have any specific reasons for some of those increases from the long-term plan budgets, given that we're saying we're mostly doing what's in the long-term plan?
So you'll remember at our December meeting, and I think we have a section in the paper that accompanied that meeting, we've recalculated the overheads, and that's had quite a significant impact on certain budgets. Resource recovery has a high use of the plant that we have, and one of the pieces that we moved in the overhead was the allocation of plant, because it was being spread wider than it should have been. So the main move to them is actually that plant cost coming through to reflect where the trucks are.
Okay, thank you. And just moving to the consultation document, I'm looking firstly on page 50 at the Capital New programme, which shows a jump from 47.4 million this year to 68.1 proposed for next year, which is about a 20.7 million increase. And then I'm understanding that that is an increased level of service. And then when I read the consultation document on page 199 of our agenda, the opening remarks talk about that we've worked hard to find savings and keep this year's total rate increase as low as possible. I'm just wondering whether you think that's an accurate statement, given how much of an increase in level of service we're proposing in the capital space.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think from a perspective of compared to the long-term plan, the capital program is largely following what was approved in the long-term plan, less the unfunded projects from NZTA. And when we're talking about the total rates increase, which is lower than what the long-term plan projected increase was, we're also within that funding the extra that we have to fund for footpath renewals, the transport emissions, and the additional regulation costs, and I guess that's coming within the envelope that the original long-term plan had originally set. So I guess that's part of the rationale for why we've sort of written it that way.
So using the words that we've kept the rate increase as low as possible, do you think that's appropriate given how much we're increasing our level of service?
I guess there's an element of different people have different views on that statement, but I don't see it as not appropriate. And
okay, so what would you consider is as low as possible when we're talking about rates increase?
Yeah, through the Chair, that's for you to consider what you believe is low as possible for the rates. My team can't provide an answer to that question.
Okay. And just my second question around the wording on straight after that sentence where it talks about we've been able to bring the rates increase down even further than what we originally proposed. Did someone think that 8.9% was, the wording even further than what we originally proposed implies that it was low to begin with? Well, that's how I would understand that statement. Did someone think that 8.9% was a low rates increase?
Again, councillor, I'm not sure the staff, that's a statement. And we decided that in this room.
Even further. The words, I'm talking about the words, a rate increase down even further.
I think the CE in the last question you asked explained a similar thing.
So if we're, okay, so the final question is, if we're uncomfortable with the way that
If you're
this is
uncomfortable
being
with
described,
it, yeah, you can put up a motion or something and change it.
well, can I just ask the question first, Mr Mayor? What I was going to ask, is there a process that we can give feedback to change it? So do we have to do, is the only way to change the content of the consultation document through motions today, or is there, usually we have an informal process of feedback and that's taken into consideration? Do we have
But if we have
minor
quite
amendments?
wide differing views, it probably is best to try and put something on paper here, because what you may think is suitable, others may think isn't. So I think, and that's happened before, so I'd suspect that we would probably have to, if you specifically want something said, you're going to have to try and put it up and get support.
So, is there any, so there's no process of giving feedback and adjustments being made between now and...
Absolutely there is, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say it's supported. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I'm just wanting to ask officers what our process is. Usually there's a process that's explained, but I couldn't see it in the papers in terms of giving feedback.
Oh, okay, we'll ask the CE.
Yeah, through the Chair, what we're doing, particularly during question time and your commentary in relation to these documents and ensuring that we get the right message going out to our community, is that we are taking notes, and where we think that maybe we haven't got the wording quite right in the CD or in other paperwork, we do look to make those specific adjustments if there is, and but if there is something specific that you would like change, then providing direction through a resolution helps the officers to be really clear about that.
Okay, thank you. I guess just to point out one further thing, on the bottom of page 206, in that bubble that Councillor Johnson referred to in terms of council reviewing its capital projects, and it says except for the transport projects, would it be also appropriate to include the ones we've added in that weren't in the long-term plan?
Get the CE to...
Yeah, through the Chair, yeah, I'll just have to have a look at the list of what those are as well anyway, but, and again, just coming to the point that I just made previously, is that there's obviously been there was some commentary on that slide that we look to perhaps reword things a little bit better so it's clearer for the community about some of those things, and we'll just take those comments on board as well about whether or not we think that we need to expand that list there.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Questions focus on the consultation document. Colleagues will be relieved to know I intend to vote for it. Firstly, I'd like to know how we're articulating the process and the scale of cuts that have already been made, first through staff prioritization and secondly through decisions at this table.
while Cam's just jumping to the right page, I'll start with that one. So on page 8 of the consultation document, or 204, we've got some key considerations, and we specifically highlight the transport program funding there. Cam and I were just chatting, we'll have to check the list of the capital programs about any other decisions that council have made. However, I know the minutes are publicly available on agendas and things, but whether we need to write some commentary in there, I'm sure we could have. That was a desire of the room.
So in terms of both process and especially what's happened in terms of the cutter before it even gets to this table, are we totally silent on that?
Through Mr. Mayor, I don't think there has been a whole heap of cuts prior to coming to this table. We've largely tried to keep to the long-term plan that you had set through the long-term plan process, and so I think adjustments that have been made have, as far as I'm aware, largely been made around this table already.
So turning to those, my recollection is that we cut over $1 million of remuneration potential in December. Is that decision transparently reflected in this consultation document?
He's looking at me. If you feel that we maybe need to be a little bit more transparent about those things, but however, they're decisions that you've made prior to going out to consultation. We simply act on your recommendations and provide those in the documentation. That's probably the best answer I have for now. I might have another one later.
Thank you. I guess what I'm trying to then understand is in some cases where decisions are made or imposed, they're very clearly reflected in text. So an example being the changes in transport funding. In other cases, they're invisible in the consultation document. And I'm trying to understand why we don't give a greater level of transparency to the community about the fact that we're not going out with bells and whistles, cherry on top, Rolls Royce, that we've actually got the base model.
Yeah, Chair, I think that, perhaps what we've tried to do in this consultation document is actually focus on those key issues that, and it's pretty, as you read the documentation, transport has been quite a big focus in here and about the changes in that particular space. So I guess there's probably, you could suggest that there's a leaning towards that within the document as well. And it's not that as officers that we haven't taken care or thought about those other matters that have, where the change has been. It's just that perhaps our focus has been in around that transport space in particular. If you feel that through the commentary that you need us to maybe beef up some commentary in some other space, we're happy to consider that as we pick up the comments around the table.
Great, thank you. Second comment or a question, bit of a Freudian slip there. Page 210, which is 14, I believe, of the consultation document, is that classic table of rates and how it might affect different quartiles, etc. Am I understanding it right that we're planning to report the change in rates as a dollar figure there rather than a percentage figure there when we actually break it down into those categories?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my read of this is that that will be in dollars in terms of what someone in those sample properties would pay.
And can I understand the rationale for that, given that almost the entire political discourse and community commentary is around percentages, why we switch out of the common parlance into something that's less well understood from a comparative basis?
I think the rationale for displaying this in that way is to try and articulate to people who fit within those categories, and loosely fit around those values what they might reasonably be expected to pay as a result of the plan in front of them, as opposed to what the change in the rates would be.
And so finally then on that, why would we not also show the percentage as well, so that it's clear for those that are interested?
We could consider that. I just need to make sure that it is first as possible, and I'm looking Steve whether that's possible, but if
Steve Patterson, Strategy Manager of Finance. The aim of this chart, if I'm correct, is 16 and 17 you're talking about, is it?
no, page 14. Steve.
Page 14, yes. Well, the difficulty there is to try to figure out how to summarise those into something that's meaningful. I guess for the moment I've put a draft there of what I intended to put. The increase, yes, was to be in dollars. We could put a line which would say what that represents in percentage terms as another line, if that's your wish.
Cool, thank you for those responses. Next question is around what we put in by way of context, and obviously the last year's rates and this year's rates tends to be the dominant thing, but as a couple examples of context, it appears to me that median rates are proposed to be 2.7% of median household income. And it appears to me that total rates as a proportion of total property value are less than 0.5%. I'm just wondering if officers have given thought to including kind of a broader context around the scale and affordability of rates.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't say I've given that sort of level of thought, but what I would say is that for many people, I suspect they are comparing to what they currently pay today and what is the actual dollar impact going to be on them, and not necessarily, they're not necessarily doing the comparison to their asset value, that probably more comparing to their own individual income circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not suggesting or asking for a substitution. I'm asking why we wouldn't provide further context that would contextualize it in terms of fairly commonly understood economic metrics like median household income.
Yeah, I think from my perspective is that you could end up putting quite a lot. There is a lot of things that you could consider, but there comes a point where it becomes it becomes difficult for some to actually understand what we're trying to necessarily tell. I think telling what the impact to them reasonably expect on the costs is a fairly common way of approaching this throughout the sector as we currently display it.
Great. Appreciate those responses. Thanks, gentlemen. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Scott and Cam. I just really want to dig in a little bit to page 27, attachment 1, which really talks about professional services. And we've talked about reallocation of professional services budget to building in-house capability. Would $1 million be sufficient to develop the diverse range of skills and capability that we would actually need within council to respond appropriately?
the CE may want to add to this, but I guess there is a whole different range of purposes as to why we use professional services. In some instances, there are specialty skill sets that we only need for short periods of time, or who we engage has access to a broader range of skill sets that we don't have in-house. And secondly, there are certainly, if you're to try and develop some of those niche skill sets in-house, there is the risk that you've developed them and they become really, really palatable for a professional services firm to then take them on board. Also, we have some areas where there are what I would call seasonal demand pressures, where we can access, I guess, additional resource for a shorter period of time, and that we don't have a long-term commitment to that. So there's a few different reasons why we might do that, and I guess it doesn't answer your question around would $1 million be enough or not. It's whether or not that would actually achieve the outcome that you're seeking to achieve through it. Is probably the thought.
Yeah, perhaps if I can just rephrase the question. Attachment 1 really sort of, I guess, articulates a very, very broad range of uses that we use professional services for. Is it practical or meaningful to actually try and bring that in-house? And if we did that, what are the risks? And I'm perhaps thinking about the patient response, or our agility in terms of being able to respond to risks that are actual risks in the community and the way that we conduct our business.
Through the chair, I'll just see if I can answer this in a slightly different way. Our view and the reason why we've got the commentary in that particular attachment is that we're kind of leaning towards that we don't think transferring $1 million out of professional services into the training and development budget is potentially a good idea at this point in time. We already have training and development budgets in place for our staff, and I think that what we do need to do is just think about what are the workforce, what are the skills and knowledge that we need going forward. Just making through our people development programs that we are targeting the right skill set to fill the gap using the existing budgets that we already currently have in place, rather than bringing necessarily some out of the professional services and into training and development. And for the reasons that Cam has talked about, we think that potentially investing even further in skill sets is that potential flight risks of training people up and then them moving into consultancy and development in their own right. So hopefully that kind of covers that off a little bit more for you.
Yeah, thank you, Wade. That's very clear. Thank you. And I've just got one other question. It relates just to a line item, page 80, which is the Safer Community Initiatives. There's a reduction in budget there. Is that an overhead change? And is there any change to level of service?
There's no change to the level of service. That is an overhead change, that reduction.
Right, and yeah, that relates to Safer Community Initiatives. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a really straightforward question. In the consultation document, pages 16 and 17, it's the infographic with the coloured boxes. This is a question actually that came from the community, I think in the long-term plan. We've used this before. Is there an intention to make the size of those boxes proportional to the cost of the thing that's in them?
I'm getting a thumbs up from Liv behind you, so yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Sabellin.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Oh.
We'll go to Councillor Sabellin first. We'll come to you second. Do you just push down?
Oh, yeah. I just have a really quick one. That's on page 36, the forecast financial statements. It says were authorised for issue by NCC on the 4th of June 2025. And then on page 29, it also says this annual budget was adopted by the council on 4th of June 2025. Just seems a little bit preemptive.
Yep, I really hope it is the 4th of June, but yes, you're right, that is a bit preemptive, so we'll put pink there for that date and we'll update it at the time.
Thank you, I appreciate it. That's all from me, thank you.
Now, Councillor Harpender.
Thank you. My question's around consultation as well, and it is about running two consultation processes at the same time. We're running water, which we are looking to have run until the 30th of March, and this we are looking to start on the 17th of March and run through till the 30th of, the 11th of April. So running two at the same time with documents that look pretty much the same, how are people going to differentiate the two documents and know which one they're consulting on when they, don't really understand the process?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I guess that's mine and my team's job to make it as clear as we possibly can through different, communication methods and stuff. I think what's really important is, and that's why I guess we wanted to get the CDE for local water back to you so fast, was that we didn't have a full 4-week crossover. So what we will look to do is those first 2 weeks for local water, we will go big and hard, and then you'll see the annual budget then, so you'll get like a flow of comms. So we'll keep talking about them both throughout the whole period. But so once we're about 3.5 weeks into the local water consultation, that's when you'll see a big spike in the comms for annual budget. So making sure that we have, I guess we give each of them the weight that they deserve.
Will you use a different printer? Like, I'm just talking about the font is exactly the same and one is the other. Will you try and style it differently so that it doesn't look exactly the same?
Yeah, I can talk to the marketing team and see what magic they can do there.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Okay, that's no further questions. All right. Well, before we go to the recommendations, thank you, team. We'll break and be back in chamber at 10 to 11, please. Thank you. All right. Kia ora everyone, welcome back. Thanks for that little addition to the interlude there. So look, we have the annual budget plan 25-26, an update including draft consultation document and supporting information. And we have a number of things here which will break them up. 1A1 is that the Chief Executive incorporate the following in draft 2025-26 annual budget supporting information for adoption at the Council meeting on the 5th of March 25. A, budgetary assumptions that are unchanged from those agreed to the Council meeting on 11th of December 2024, except for 1, the additional operating expenditure budget of $400,000 to fund the proposed levy for the Water Services Regulator. 1A2, that the Chief Executive incorporate the following in the draft 2025-26 annual budget supporting information for adoption at the Council meeting on 5th of March 25. A budgetary assumptions that are unchanged from those to at the Council meeting on the 11th of December 2024, except for 2, reduce the net operating budget, including professional services, by approximately $1 million to achieve the total rates increase of no more than 7.7% for the 25-26 financial year, moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by myself. 3, that the risks and applications of the professional services budget reduction be presented at Council meeting the 5th of March as part of adopting the annual planned budget for consultation, again moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by myself. And then 1B, that the Chief Executive incorporate the following in the draft 25-26 annual budget supporting information for adoption at the Council meeting of the 5th of March 25. B, that financial statements and other supporting information based on the drafts included as attachment 2, and noting that $100,000 has been set aside in each of the financial years 2025-26 and 26-27 to support the Centrepoint Theatre rebuild until further confirmation from Centrepoint as to which allocation of support in kind, consent cost grant would be the most appropriate. And I think that is it, isn't it? Oh, wait, there's more. 2A, that the consultation document include information on the proposed rates as a proportion of the household income, moved by Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Bowen. 2B, that on the table on page 14 of the consultation document include the percentage increases in rates for each of the various categories, again moved by Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Bowen. And then 2, that Council note the consultation document will be presented for adoption at the Council meeting on the 5th of March 2025 based on the draft and attachment 3 as amended above. Is that it? Okay. That's if they all pass. What I'll do is we'll just start at the start, because there's a few of them. So I'm happy to move 1AI, and that's around number 1, that we incorporate the following in the draft, the budgetary assumptions as unchanged from the 11th of December, and that we have to add in the $400,000 for the proposed water service regulator. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Okay, we'll just speak on this. Look, happy to move this. Not happy about the $400,000 to fund the government department. I think that's been well articulated in some of the questions. It is unusual that you would fund that sort of government service, but it is getting forced upon us. We've gone through the budgetary items in lots of detail on the 11th of December. I'm not going to repeat that, other than to say I thought we'd reached quite a good space until some of these other things have popped in, hence why I'm keen to have a look at a little bit more tweaking. So I'll open it up as anybody else wants to speak on 1A. If we don't, we'll just vote on 1A, please. that is passed. 14 votes for and 1 against. All right. Okay, we now go to 1A2, and this is with Councillor Wood's additional recommendation. Councillor Wood.
Mr Mayor, I just wonder if you need to move 1A and then we move 1A2 as an amendment, so either that can be accepted or declined before we go through. Otherwise, you have to decline the entire thing if you're not supportive of the amendment.
We've already achieved that by the first one.
Sure. All right, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for the consideration of whether or not we looked at an internal capacity budget at the end of December last year. I was happy to receive advice on that from our officers and happy to accept the advice from officers, which is a better way of achieving a reduction in professional services wouldn't be to create an additional budget. It would simply be to reduce the size of the consultancy budget over time by reducing the budget now. I also apologise that this came to council a little bit later than I intended yesterday. I was waiting officer advice, so I hope you can appreciate that. I want to start by saying I totally accept the need for professional services, and there is no intention with this resolution that we look at getting rid of professional services completely. It is not sensible for council to have, for example, an internal liquefaction plan change expert. That would not be a good utilisation of council resources or funding. Just as I describe in papers, if we need capacity, for example, in the summer months when we need additional support for a particular activity. So I accept that we need professional services. Our operating budget, excluding depreciation interest, is approximately $147 million. Our operational professional services budget is $15 million. So 10% of our operating budget is currently captured by professional services, and I believe it is sensible, in line with the direction we gave in the long-term plan, to look at how we move to a more self-sustaining model rather than sending money out of town and out of region to external consultants. This would achieve a number of things. One is it would act on the advice from page 27 in attachment 1. 2, it would start the rates conversation with our community with a 7 in front of it rather than an 8, which I think, given the cost of living crisis that continues through our community and given the costs that they're facing, I think a 7 is a much better starting point for that conversation. And I note that it would still be outside of our rates affordability limit that we ourselves set of 7%. So if we ourselves are recognising that above 7% really is pushing the bounds of what's affordable to our community, I think it is much better to start in this position. I also note that, and it's not included as wrapped up in this, but the next recommendation, which if this passes I hope councillors would support, brings information back on the implications of this to us in March, that we can have oversight of that decision and oversight of flow and effects. Officers have also noted in page 27, that if a skill set was required for a specific purpose, then that would be brought back to council with budget for an associated project. So we've got a fail-safe in there that if this had unintended consequences or if something was to come up in unexpected ways, that would be brought back to the chamber for us to review in that time. So I hope colleagues will support this to start the conversation with our community in a better space. I note at the end of last year we reduced our budget by 1.2 million, which was then filled up entirely. As the Mayor is referring to, I believe we got to quite a good space, but costs, both internal and external, have been put upon us. I also note the reason that this is being brought here today, I don't want to start a whole other conversation about lots and lots of reductions. This was the process we set out as councillors in December of looking at that reduction, and this is the only one that I'll be moving or supporting in terms of changing budgets at this point. I appreciate my colleagues' wisdom and advice at that point around getting it to come back to us in February, and so this is just wrapping up that process that we started in December with this budget bind. So I hope you can support it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions around this. The first being, trying to recall in the long-term plan process, I seem to recall that we cut about $1 million out of professional services at some point along that journey, and I was trying to recall and hoping somebody can clarify, was that only in year 1? Or was that an ongoing cut of $1 million that was already realized through years 2 and 3 as well?
Through the chair, I've got 2 fingers being held up, so that year 2, in the right manner, I should say. Yeah. So year 2 is what I'm getting from the staff.
Sorry, just clarify. So it's year 1 and year 2 was that resolution for a reduction of $1 million in both year 1 and year 2 of the long-term plan.
Thank you. So to be clear then, this would be a further $1 million
over and above?
Yes.
Okay, great. This might be for Councillor Wood, just interested in the language there around net operating budget, including professional services rather than actually specifically ring fencing it to professional services, and what your intent is with leaving that open wording.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I look happy to answer that. So a $1 million reduction in professional services would leave us with a 7.75% increase, which would be rounded up to 7.8. So if you need an extra 50,000 to get it to round down to 7.7, that was the intention there. If councillors' will is that we ring fence that to exclusively professional services, then I'm more than happy to amend the resolution to reflect that. But I thought it would be better to give the Chief Executive some wiggle room rather than locking him in. But certainly the intention is the lion's share, in fact, almost well, at least $1 million will come from professional services, but there may need to be a small reduction elsewhere to achieve that 7.7.
Thanks. So that does sound to me a bit different than the words on the screen, and for me it would be helpful if they better reflected your perspective.
That's fine. Mr. Mayor, are you happy for us to amend that to read at least, or not even at least, just $1 million from professional services?
Yes, although in speaking to officers, they did want a little bit of wriggle room. But if it was going to, if it was the thing that was going to hold somebody back from supporting this, then I'm okay to get rid of the whole net operating budget. But it was on advice, or I should say not advice, but some commentary back from officers that if you had the net operating budget there, including professional services, and exactly as the mover said, the vast lion's share would come out of, but there was some wriggle room as a catch-all.
Thanks. That's helpful. The edits that are coming to screen, just so you're aware, do give me a greater level of comfort than what was originally proposed. I would still have questions about why we would have a direction to the Chief Executive in this tight process that includes the word approximately.
Because technically it's 1.05 or something like that. It's a minuscule change. We could put at least if that would make you more comfortable.
I'll just get the CE to comment because we're making all the commentary and it's actually the operations side.
Through the Mayor, just having a look at that, if what it is that you're trying to achieve is a rate increase no more than 7.7%, then you may not need a dollar in there at all.
Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm really reluctant to support this. It really is, I think, planning on the fly. It's willy-nilly planning. Yeah. When we were talking about professional services earlier, the Chief Executive clearly articulated the risks around reducing that. And as we've already heard, you know, like this is another bite at the same cherry. Really, council has got to be able to respond to a very, very complex environment in terms of the needs of our community. And if you keep cutting into your professional services budget, you're not going to be able to respond in a timely manner. Neither are you going to be able to do so effectively. So at this point in time, I do not see any value in setting an arbitrary number of 7.7%, which really is about kicking the ball back to the Chief Executive and telling him to take over the governance role. It's abdicating our responsibility. So please, I think we're actually ready to talk to our community about what is actually intended. It is part of what we've done for the long-term plan. And this really is a significant departure from that. So please don't support it. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. A question first to the mover. What's the rationale behind, well, now the figure's been taken out, what's the rationale of achieving a total rates increase of no more than 7.7% as opposed to 7.8 or 7.6 or some other number?
Palatability in the chamber.
Palatability, did you say?
If you wanted to amend it to be 7.6, I'd be more than happy to support that. Much as if a council wanted to amend it to 7.8, I'd be happy to support that. We're trying to achieve a political balance here of what we can get across the line. So there is not a science to 7.7.
Right, okay, thank you. I'll just have a comment then. I do have some concerns about this, I have to say, particularly as this was a budget that was already reduced in the long-term plan. I understand that the mover wants to reduce rates. I think we all do. But I'm not sure that this is the way to do it, to be honest. It looks like an easy cut because we can't see the consequence straight away. But it may well slow down processes in council. It may hamstring us in receiving advice. And I'm not convinced that this is the way to achieve a lower total rates increase, which seems to be the motivation of the mover, rather than a discomfort with professional services budget. So I think at this stage I'm not going to support it, although, you know, if a report comes back from the CE saying, oh, this is absolutely fine, we can do this, no problem, it won't be an issue, might reconsider in March. But at this stage I think this isn't the way to go about things. We had the debate in December about where we were wanting to sit in terms of programme support and programs not to support. And I think now's the stage to go out and consult. And then if there are adjustments that need to be made as a result of consultation with the community, well then let's think again specifically. But at this point, I don't feel comfortable with supporting this rather abstract reduction without knowing the specific implications of it. Thank you.
Councillor Mickelard, online.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Can you hear me?
Just speak up, councillor.
Can you hear me?
Just very, very faintly.
It's all right. It's okay.
Okay, all right. Maybe you might want to text through your comment or whatever it was here. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Dennison.
Question, Mr Mayor, if I could, to the mover. Hypothetically, you're suggesting that this is the only recommendation you'd put up in support, but if there's other members that said they wanted to increase a line for 500,000, suggesting that this should be dropped to 1.5 million to reach a targeted rate percentage.
I wonder if the question could just clarify exactly what you mean by that. 500,000 more in additional professional services or 500,000 on another budget?
Well, can I suggest that your view of this recommendation might be in isolation of your motivation to put up only one recommendation, but if, with an open mind, there might be other members that might want to increase a budget of 500,000 that went through. Are you proposing this budget then reduces by 1.5 million to achieve your targeted rate?
So I appreciate I hear what you're saying now. So what I was trying to get at is this was a process set by council in December. We said we wouldn't make a decision in December, we'd wait for information to come back on the professional services budget in February to then make a decision in February. So given we didn't do that for other budgets, say we'd said we wanted to look at our maintenance budget in February, well then it would be completely appropriate to be making decisions around the maintenance budget in February. But the recommendation that we passed as council was, rather than make the decision in December, we would wait till February for a report back on this specific budget line. So that's why I feel it's appropriate to be amending this, but not reopen the entire conversation for all other potential changes. That's the rationale.
Okay, I'd like to speak. I think there's a real weakness in this recommendation, actually tagging it to the rate increase, because of it's a budget provision, and we should actually say the set amount, either plus or minus a figure, and not actually tag it in isolation that it's to the rate impact, because I'm open-minded. There could be another recommendation that comes straight after this is passed to include another figure of some sort which affects this budget unknowingly. And so real weakness, and I'm not going to support it because of that. Thank you.
It was officers who took the million out. My intention was for there to be a figure in the recommendation. So could we add that back in and remove reference to rates increase if that would make councillors more comfortable? So it says that it's a total reduction of 1 million, like we'd originally planned. Yep.
Yes, we can. Okay, we'll go around the room and we'll just get that sorted. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I am very happy to support this for a couple of reasons. One is firstly that I do think in the current environment where our community is saying how hard they are finding it in terms of coping with rates increase, that we do need to look at every angle to see where there are savings that can be made. And this is particularly an area that was identified through the long-term plan process, and someone might correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we were at around the $14 million at that point. So perhaps this is not necessarily a cut, but keeping any increase to a minimum. I think the advice that was provided in our papers was really useful as well, and in particular, where it says that at times there are placeholder budgets for programs of work that the exact detail is not yet known, and there are some examples given. And my understanding is that when we include some of these placeholders under the delegation that the Chief Executive has, there is some fluidity in terms of how the annual budget is carried out throughout the year, and there are some overs and unders, and actually keeping the budget tight, I think, is a better way, in my view, of perhaps reining in some of the increases. Then at the bottom of that council advice, it says that if it's council's intention to reduce the size of the consultancy budget over time, an approach might be to simply reduce the budget now, and if needed, it's brought back to the council. So my preference is that if, for whatever reason, the budget that we do provide is not adequate for really important work, I think it's a much more preferable for that to come back to us with the context of why additional funding is needed, rather than simply approving placeholder budgets at this stage that may or may not be required. So for those reasons, I'm really happy to support this.
Councillor Happer.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm also very happy to support this. I think that with us changing our rating system, there'll be a lot of people impacted with the way their rates will be affected. I think there are people that are hurting at the moment, and I think that it's really important to think of that going forward. So I think that we should be looking at all costs that we can try and save and try and bring our rates down as best we can. So I do think if we can bring it down by a percentage, I think it's really, really important. So I do appreciate the member bringing this forward. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and colleagues. Appreciate Councillor Wood bringing this forward, and the responsibility over the last few minutes to bring it into a more discreet and understood recommendation. I wanted to briefly explain my vote, because I think it's more important to explain them, especially when sometimes they depart from existing patterns that perhaps individual elected members have set down. And probably in most years I would have bounced up and had a go. I actually think that I've been watching this year unfold with interest on the back of the $1 million that was cut. And to my perception, I haven't yet heard signals from the organization that starts to suggest we are getting to any stage of pain or jeopardy or risk that is significant to us. And I'm not suggesting we just keep cutting until blood appears, but I am suggesting that it is worth continuing this experiment to at least until March to get the information back around risks and implications. So my request in supporting this is to the Chief Executive to make sure that we have very good information coming back to us around potential risks and implications, because I do want to see where this potentially takes. But so far,
I'm comfortable to support this at this stage, to, in fact, give a little bit more breathing room to the community, as others have articulated, and to get some further advice from officers around the specific implications that might be here. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I do find myself a bit conflicted on this one. I think on balance I will vote to support it, but I wanted to explain why I'm a little bit conflicted, because it feels to me like we're targeting this budget because we think that doesn't hurt in council, because it's not our staff. So there are two ways in which this could hurt. It could hurt because our staff don't get the support they need, and that can come back through the chamber. But I was a little concerned with the rhetoric in the original overstatement that professional services is money that's sent outside of our community, that it all goes off Auckland or something. Your professional services happens in Palmerston North as well. And when we cut budgets, they don't just impact on council's ability to deliver service, they impact on the wider environment within which we offer. And colleagues will know, as I do, I know of at least one professional services firm in town that's currently going through a redundancy process. So I just want us to be careful as we think about our own budgets, about the wider ecosystem that we sit within. It's absolutely our first priority to think about impact on ratepayers, but the people who provide professional services are also our ratepayers. It's a secondary consideration, and it won't change how I vote today, but it is something I do think we need to be alive to, that sometimes these have real impacts on real people outside of just our council people.
I'll come back to you in a minute. Thanks, colleagues. Look, I'm not against professional services by any means. In fact, those that have been in business or have dealt with consultants and professional services know their value. I'd have to say, though, Councillor Bowen, most of our money does go to the big firms. Yes, they do employ some local people, and the local people work on that. But I'll just give you an understanding. In my term, the creep of professional services under different management was massive. We were spending nearly 30 million not that long ago. So, yes, they were providing services where our staff now provide. And I'm just pushing back on a little bit around, there's examples of great in-house teams at our council. The depot's one. Another one is waste and recycling. Now, many councils sub that work out, i.e. Another professional service or another service firm is taking that work. And look, I think there has been creep. Absolutely there has been. And I think, we need to understand around the efficiency of what can be done. We'll understand what that'll be in number 3 when that comes back to us. And look, remember also, there was no actual rate number or increase mentioned in the chamber when we had the meeting on December 11th, because there was stuff flying in and out. And actually, I thought we had, and I'm going to be really upfront, I thought we had a 7 in front of this. I did. But with different things, including water services fee, has pushed the thing over into the 8s. And we've done some really good work with some trims, but not chopping off fingers or arms. So I'm actually okay with reducing the rates to get a 7 in front of it as well. I'll be really upfront about that. And look, I think we'll hear from our community, from our residents, what they think as well. It's, as Councillor Harpiter and others have said, it is tough out there. And, it's biting. Households, businesses are looking at their costs. They're looking for their own efficiency. I look at what we do at home, and you do make some personal choices. And council needs to do that as well. We just can't, we've got to be agile, and we just can't keep going, oh yeah, we employed that person, we did this, we contracted that out. Actually, we just need to have a look and think, is that the way we're going to go into the future? So there are some efficiencies in this place that can be done, I'm absolutely sure of it. And we're also rebuilding our own teams again. I mean, an example is things like our tree team and everything, which were totally pushed out, and we want to try and bring some of that expertise back into our place. So I think this is not killing the golden goose by any means. It is an example of where we can look at what possible efficiencies can be made, find out what they're going to be and what the consequences of those are. But I don't think this is dangerous at all, and I will ask you to support it. Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Wood, for right of reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for the conversation. I apologise for the malleability of the motion. What I was trying to illustrate was the impact that this would have, so that if we made this reduction, that is the result we would get. I appreciate the concern around what Councillor Dennison outlined, that if you tag it to a rate figure and then $200,000 comes in the next day from some other source. So the intention was always that the primary reduction would be $1 million to professional services. It was simply an illustrative example to try and show you where we would get to. I want to address the concerns that Councillor Johnson raised, because they are fair ones. There are two drivers behind doing this. My primary driver in December was I would like to support our team to grow our internal capacity and reduce our professional services budget over time. Initially, this was cost neutral, so you would reduce that budget by $1 million and put $1 million into a new internal capacity budget. And I was very open to that. And if the advice that came back today was that would be a good method to do, we should go ahead with that, then I would have been very happy to support that. That is the primary driver. The advice, as I outlined in my opening statements, and Councillor Naylor's repeated, is that if the intention is to reduce the size of the consultancy budget, then making a reduction now is the better way to do that, rather than creating a new budget to go alongside it. So I just want to be very clear, that was where this comes from. The secondary benefit is that it impacts the rates increase. And that is also an important benefit to consider, that if we look at this, it does reduce what we go out to our community with. So they are the two drivers behind it. On the question of responding in a timely manner, or the suggestion that we were abdicating our role as governors, this has clearly outlined the budget that we expect this to come out of. Simply saying to the Chief Executive, go and reduce the budget by $1 million full stop, I agree we'd be abdicating our responsibility as governors. But being clear and specific what we're looking at reducing and the outcomes we would like to achieve with it, I don't think moves us outside of our role as elected members in this organisation, nor do I think it's planning on the fly, given that this was a report that was requested in December and came in February. I think we've given ourselves lead time, and we give ourselves further lead time by getting a report back in March on the details of this before we adopt our budget for consultation. Councillor Bowen is correct, and look, fair enough. I was making a generalisation that a lot of our consultancy budget goes out of town, but you are absolutely right, there are some of it that stays local. So look, I would hope we can support this, and look, if the alarm bells go off and it's nuclear Armageddon in March, well then let's deal with that when we get there. But I think this is a sensible point for us to start, so I hope you'll support it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, we have 1A2 and we'll vote on that, please. And that has passed 11 votes for and 4 against. All right, we'll now go to the other recommendations. Number 3, and I don't think you need to speak to that, and I think we've done that, so we'll vote on number 3, please. And that has passed 15 votes for, none against. Right. Now we've got 1B, and this is, as the papers, this has already been well circulated. So again, I'm not going, and this was moved by myself and the Deputy Mayor, so I'm not going to speak any further to that. Nobody else is? Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Naylor.
Mayor, yeah, I do briefly want to just explain why I won't be supporting this recommendation. I think any draft annual budget that we consult on needs to be reasonable, fair and appropriate for the current environment. I can't hand on heart go to my community and say that I think this is a reasonable plan. We've made some progress in terms of pulling back some of the budgets in December and just today. However, my main area of concern remains the capital program, and as page 50 in our agenda outlines, a 43% increase in capital new program from this year to next year. That is a huge increase in level of service that we are proposing. It's the level of that increase has not been well highlighted in the communication that's included in our draft consultation document. I think it would be most people looking at that consultation document would be unaware of the significance of increase in level of service that we're proposing through this plan. Further to that, I think it's appropriate that any draft annual budget actually falls within our own policy limits, and as outlined in our agenda, this one doesn't. When we did our long-term plan last year, as is often the way with long-term plans, there was quite a lot of stuff that got pushed out from year one and fell into year two. So year two was always the concern in my mind in terms of the size of some of the work that was pushed out there. When you look at the nature of many of those capital programs, they are very optional things. They're in the play and recreation space, they're in the community support space. They're not all waters. They're not all wastewater, which I think sometimes the rhetoric has been, oh, well, we've got no choice, it's all about the wastewater. But actually, all of those things are great for our community and will benefit our community, but everything I've heard from my community in the last year or so is that they cannot afford those nice-to-haves, those extra things. Perhaps the Rolls-Royce cherry on top is actually been included in our budget to some extent. Yes, there's been some things that have been pulled back. We started with the long-term plan year two budgets, then we got the added benefit of 2.1 less interest, but we don't see that reflected in the reductions because, colleagues, what happened was that got filled up with extra space that some of you proposed and what our government has also imposed, so it's a mixture of those things. But with that 2.1% reduction in interest, we should have been able to translate that into a much lower rate increase to our community. So, yeah, I just wanted to explain that. I don't like having to vote against a draft document, but this is one certainly that I think we could have changed. We did test some of that in December. There didn't appear to be an appetite to pull back the capital program at that point. I'm certainly interested in hearing from the community and colleagues. Councillor Finlay, unfortunately, isn't here today, but last week indicated he was interested in some pruning back also, which I'm very interested to see if that translates to some ideas. So I won't be supporting that for those reasons.
Councillor Johnson.
Look, I'm sorry, but I just can't sit here and listen to that. I really can't. For a start, characterising any community project as a nice to have is something that has been done repeatedly in this chamber, and I reject that. I absolutely reject that. Community projects are not nice to have, and the only things that are essential are waters and roads. Community projects are absolutely essential if you've got any vision at all for the community and that you want to build a cohesive society. So I just reject this consistent rhetoric that community projects are nice to have. Not nice to have. They are as essential as any other aspect of business on council, and I'm not going to sit here and listen to that nonsense.
Colleagues, just as a right of reply, I wasn't going to use it because I didn't think I needed to. But like Councillor Johnson, look, I'm really sorry. And I thought we were talking about around supporting a 50-year-old organisation that could have easily moved, and I don't think Centrepoint Theatre would be like to be called a Rolls-Royce or a cherry on top. They're not. They're raising 95% of the money themselves. And so I take exception to that. And look, the vast majority of projects are infrastructure related, but we deal in people Sorry, I'm speaking. You can come back to it at the end. But we deal in people, and we deal in facilities that support people. And that is community facilities, that is sport and recreation, that is libraries, that is community centres. And if we don't do that, the social glue of our city just disappears. So we've got to do something in this space. And we've taken a very balanced view to that as well. Not everything's got through the gate by any means. And we've trimmed and cost cut and done efficiencies where possible. So I'm sorry, but we do need to acknowledge that we haven't sat here and been lazy with what's been going on at all. So I'm sorry, I wasn't going to speak, but I just had to. Now, Councillor Naylor.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Just wanted to, understanding orders, misrepresentation of a member. What you referred to about Centrepoint Theatre was not what I said in my, what I was referring to, the recommendation in front of us that is talking about incorporating everything in the draft annual budget, supporting information. I did not refer to
Which
Centrepoint.
includes Centrepoint.
I did not refer to Centrepoint.
You referred to everything.
Mr Mayor, you've misrepresented my comments, and I'd ask that
You said them, I didn't say them.
I did not mention Centrepoint. I was speaking to the first recommendation in terms of all the supporting information. I feel that what you said misrepresented.
I agree to disagree, I'm sorry. All right, we will vote, colleagues. One. That is passed, 13 votes for and 1 against. We've lost somebody. Councillor Fitzgerald is for, so we'll just add that on. So it's 14 for and 1 against. All right, we'll go back to the substantive again. And this is around councillors. Are you okay we take these together? I think we can do that from a time perspective. So this is around 2A and 2B, just adding some percentages and different information to the consultation. You want to speak? Okay, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, happy to take them together unless there's in a particular contest around some of this. I just thought these were two elements of information that were worth adding to the consultation document and that would be worth directing through the chamber rather than simply leaving to officers' reflection. So the first is really beginning to just put a little bit more context around what the proposed rates look like in terms of what an individual or what a household might be experiencing. The suggestion is that we do something around proportionate household income, and that is at least one way of inviting the community to better reflect on and understand affordability thereof as they may be experiencing it personally and as it may sit across the community at large. And the second one is really just to try to be consistent. We talk and work in percentage changes and then suddenly we abandon them. I think it's very unhelpful for the community to not have that information consistent through in terms of where percentages sit. So I'd ask for your support on both of these. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. If I could ask a question of the mover to start with. Just want to understand around 2A, Councillor Barrett, when you suggest household income, are you suggesting we might have a range of those from a single individual living in a house versus a couple with a family versus a retired, what are you just suggesting the median household income full stop?
Yeah, thanks. I'd be leaving that to officers. So, I did a quick Google this morning and got a number for median household income. I would hope that with an in-house economist, we've perhaps got a bit more data that could show some of the variation around that because I absolutely think that averages are meaningless.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be difficult and ask them to be separated if that's all right.
Sorry?
I will be difficult and ask for 2A and 2B to be separated if that's all right. Just to speak very briefly, I think there's quite a significant difference between average household and average household expense. And I think, as Councillor Barrett says, using a median or a median, I think we antagonise those in our community on low incomes, because really the main impact of our rates impacts aren't borne or aren't felt as harshly by those on the median household income. The reason, certainly for me, that motivates me in this chamber to fight as much as I can for lower rate increases is for those on low incomes, those on fixed incomes in our community. And I feel that those are the people in our community who feel these increases the most. And so saying to somebody on a low income, well, don't worry, it's only 2% of those on a median household income or a medium household income, I just don't think that's helpful to somebody understanding that impact. Yes, maybe there'll be some things where we have some different households, but unless we're doing a range of low, medium and high for people in different scenarios, I just don't think this will be a useful tool for our community, particularly because average household expense varies. So you could be an average household where you're mortgage free, and so therefore a 2.5% of your income going to rates isn't very much, versus a young couple who's just bought a house, they're mortgaged up to the gunnels, and it's a massive difference. So I just think too many variables to introduce something like this into our consultation document. So I appreciate the intent of what the move is trying to do, but unless we have this matrix with all sorts going on where somebody, oh, that's me in there, I just don't think it's conducive to good consultation. As for 2B, I'm very supportive of that.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, there's a lot of really good work that's gone into this draft consultation document, but the opening page had a couple of really blaringly obvious comments that I just felt that I couldn't support, and I feel would actually be quite a misrepresentation to our community if they're left in. And I did tease those out during the questions. One is that we've worked hard to find savings and keep this year's total rate increase as low as possible. Yes, we have worked hard to find some savings, but we've also added quite a lot in, which is reflected in the 2.2 million additional expenses as compared to our December draft that we had.
Sorry, Councillor, we're speaking about this around the proposed, including information around proposed rates as a report, what's on the screen, not regurgitating.
So you said that we were taking them all together, and I thought recommendation 2 was approving the consultation document.
No, we're doing
That's
that
what
in
you
the
said.
substantive. We've still got more to go.
So
There's others to go.
I can wait and speak later. I thought
Yeah,
we were talking
yes,
about
please. Yeah. That's been changed to recommendation 3. Yeah. Okay, back to you, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Wood for raising the point around the potential limits that if we are prescriptive and had the word median or had the word average in there, we would be introducing. The word median does not appear in the recommendation. The word average does not appear in the recommendation. This is asking officers to go and provide some information on proposed as a proportion of household income. It could say incomes, just to be very clear. I think it'd be really useful to have some upper and lower and quartiles and all that kind of stuff. I have not been prescriptive here. I'd ask you to reconsider. This is simply giving officers the opportunity to provide some context around what our proposed rates look like as a proportion of household incomes. Thank you.
All right, councillors, we're going to vote on 2A only, please. That has passed 15 votes for and none against. Okay, we'll go back to 2B, I think it is. Yeah, 2B. And Councillor, you don't need, yeah, thank you. All right, no other comments. We will vote on 2B, please. Yeah, there's passed 15 votes for and none against, thank you. All right. Okay, so this is the substantive, and this is around the consultation document presented for adoption, and I'm happy to move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and this is the catch-all. So look, councillors, thanks to the staff for everything. We don't really do as much in this space in between a year or two, but the community, and we've done this because the community and the cost of living is happening. So it's been a big lot of work to go through that we wouldn't normally go through in an LTP process. So there has been quite a lot of, I suppose, looking under each stone and just seeing what is there, what is happening, perhaps juggling, and just want to acknowledge the entire staff, because I do know that although it comes through the GMs, it will ripple through the organisation when a decision is made in this chamber. So thanks to the team, especially those crunching some of the numbers too. And via the CE, if we could just make sure that the staff understand the work, it's appreciated. Councillors, I do hope you can support this. It'll go out to the community and we'll hear back on what they think. And I think it's clear that there's a lot more than just pipes and roads and water services, although the vast majority is in that space. There's people involved, as I said. And perhaps, like some other people in a bigger house down in Wellington, you've got to think about the people. You've got to think about community funding. You've got to think about the services and amenities that we provide. I think of swimming pools. If we didn't provide swimming pools, because they're quite expensive to run and provide, who would do that? Probably nobody. So in an island nation, I think we should have swimming pools and people should learn to swim. So, I mean, that's just one example. There's countless others. And this city has had fantastic councils before us that have provided great amenities in arts, sport, recreation. Our pathways are world class. So we've got a lot to be thankful for. A lot of this is really just keeping those things going too and maintaining those to the acceptable levels of standard. So please, I hope you can put this out there and just what our community thinks. And I'll invite comments. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to continue what I thought I'd started to speak to this earlier. Yes, there is some good stuff in this consultation document, but it is silent in terms of what has been added in by elected members. We've commented on what's been imposed on us by central government, but we haven't acknowledged what we've added in through the choices we've made around this table, and that has driven. The language in here will make some of our community quite irate. If we try telling them that we've put their rates increase down even further than what we originally proposed, you know, whether it's 7, 6, 7 or 8, most of the community will consider those considered significant, particularly in a year where we're implementing a rates review. There are other changes that throw up all sorts of other anomalies that mean that some people will be paying significantly more. So for those reasons, I think we need to be, if we're going to put a consultation document out, we've got to be honest and own the decisions that have been made around this table. Of course, I support investment into play and rec and investment into community support, but we need to implement those capital new programs at a pace and a rate that our community can afford. And the steep curve of 43% increase from this year to next in capital space, many of which projects we can make decisions about when those might happen or the size of those projects. We really need to own that 3.5% of our rates increase is directly as a result of the size of our capital program. And I think that's an area that we need to seriously look at.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a small comment from me to reiterate that we are consulting on two things at one time, and we just need to make sure that our community are aware of that, because it is hard for them to find documents and find things on the web, so make sure that we've got two different documents going out in two different ways. So I know that Liv will be all over that, and that we just have to make sure that we've got that all sorted out. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We've got the final recommendation of the annual budget, and it'll go out. I know Councillor Harper has concerns, but there is a crossover, but they are separated in the sense that one starts earlier and one finishes later. But I'm sure there'll be a bit of consultation fatigue when we get to nature calls as well, and options there. So bring on consultation. Okay, we'll vote on number 2. And it has passed 14 votes for and 1 against. All right, we'll move through to our next paper, which is number 9, around fees and charges, and invite Steve Patterson to speak to that review. That's page 223 of your papers. Steve.
Mr Mayor, elected members, the report on fees and charges is provided to you in a similar form to what I've tended to do over recent years. It ends up being quite a big process, looking through all aspects of the council's operations, and we've been doing this work in conjunction with bringing together the budgets for your consideration. So there is, as I said, in terms of preparing the budgets, there has been thought given to what the recommendations will be around fees and charges. As is usual, I've been through and listed for you all of the different types of fees and charges that we have that require approval by the council, one form or another. Some fees and charges, as you're aware, require a period of public consultation. Others are ones that you make the decision here today, and we advertise the fact that that decision's been made at some time before the end of June. And all of these changes that are recommended here would be for implementation from the 1st of July. Each time when we look through this process, we investigate what might have changed in the particular activity from one year to the next, and whether there are things that would drive a need to change the fees and charges by sums that are above normal, if you like, above some sort of inflationary provision. It's always tricky in looking at particular activities if there's something fundamental that's changed about what we represent as being the cost of that activity. And this year, as you're aware, through the budgetary process at times, we've explained some changes that have been brought about by reassessing the way some of the overheads of the council are allocated against particular activities, and that then reflects in what we say is the cost of that activity, and then any comparison we make about how much revenue we need in order to meet the council's revenue fund target is impacted as well. So try to highlight those where there is a situation that occurs like that. In some areas, our own council's fees and charges are consistent or similar levels to what they might be in other parts of the country. Some places, some activities, they're at the higher end of the scale, and the staff involved in those particular activities, with a bit of help from others more broadly in the council, are trying to better understand why that might be so. In part, sometimes it's because other councils may have a different policy about the proportion of fees and charges that will be borne by the users directly. It could be that other councils allocate the costs of their overheads in a different way, and therefore what they show as being their costs are differently represented. So it's always difficult to make those comparisons in a way which is meaningful. Our recommendations broadly are about trying to meet both the budgetary and revenue and funding policy expectations as we've determined them through this chamber. In broad terms, for most of the fees here, we've recommended changes that in percentage terms, more or less across the board, with the odd exception in some areas. In the schedules, we've highlighted where there are changes proposed, and they're all in red in the particular schedules. There is one area in particular where the charges proposed to be increased are quite significant, and that's the trade waste area. And we had a similar issue last year. It's partly driven by the mechanism that we use to do the calculation, which is related to the bylaw that's involved in that trade waste area. And it's quite a complex area. It's got a whole lot of different variables that drive it. Variables about the flows through the plant, flows generally, the cost of running the plant over the previous couple of years. So it's built on historical information, not necessarily what's proposed in the budget for the coming year for running the plant. So in a sense, the charges trail what has been the flow and the cost in the year before or the years before. So recognising that those trade charges, if they are to be approved as calculated based on the formulas that we have, that we've used for many years, recognising that is high, I've provided a couple of options here for you to consider. I guess the recommendation is to go with the first of those ones, which is the charge that's required under the formula, but there are alternates there for you to consider. I think for the moment that's the nature of the things I want to draw to your attention. Answer questions if you have any.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, a few questions from my colleagues, but I'll start. So you just made a comment there, and I had written down here to ask it, is how we were placed with other similar-sized regional city councils in terms of our general fees and charges. But I'll go down to trade waste as well, because I know there's some quite hefty increases there. So just a general comment, are we sort of medium, or are we more at the higher side of fees or at the low side of fees?
The information I'm advised from the staff in that sort of area is that we're broadly in the ballpark of the fees that would be charged for that type of activity.
So Whangarei, Napier, Nelson, New Plymouth, I'm not talking metros, I'm talking...
I haven't personally double-checked those. I'm not sure there's anyone in the room that can answer that specifically, but the one, even... no, I can't answer that as clearly and concisely as you'd ask in terms of those particular ones, but what I'd been advised was that
we're in the ballpark. Okay. Yeah. So just with trade waste, because there's a couple of options there for councillors to have a look at. I go to page in the appendices, page 238, and we have the schedule there with the categories, and under the trade waste table 3, schedule 1, we have 24, 25 charges, GST inclusive, and then we've got 25, 26. So my understanding it ranges from sort of 19% increased up to about 27, 28% increase, is that right?
In that sort of, yes.
Yeah, okay. And what's the process going forward? Do we have to go, do we go and talk, do we consult with those customers? Do we?
Yeah. In this particular case, the requirement is to consult. It's not a special consultative procedure that's required per se, but it is something similar to that. And it's been traditional for us to communicate with those trade waste customers, outlining to them what's proposed, and then come back to you again in May or thereabouts.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Steve. I'd like to ask a question, notwithstanding what you said in your commentary about other councils having different methods of allocating expenditure, making it complex sometimes to make a comparison. Do every 3 or 5 or 6 years, do we benchmark ourselves against our neighbours to see how we compare?
I don't do that comprehensively as part of this process, but certainly I'm aware that the staff in the various parts of the council have benchmarked these figures against others.
Okay, so for example, on page 255, I had a wood burner put in last year, and the provider said, oh yeah, well you can go to Tokomaru and it's half the cost. And I went, that can't be possible. But Horowhenua District Council, we're suggesting we're going to charge $761 for a freestanding wood burner. They charge $467, so that's 57% more that we're charging to provide the same service as somebody 15 minutes down the road. I'm wondering, when our service teams identify any benchmarking to the council, how that fits into the position that they're getting from us today.
I'm not sure whether our regulatory manager may wish to have a discussion about that, but from my perspective, we've had a number of staff, both those who specialise in the field and others more corporately, having a look at the information that's been provided and testing whether we think what we're looking to charge is a fair representation of the amount of time and effort and cost that's involved in that particular work. We know that in some of these cases, every few years we have a very detailed structural review of the way the fees and charges are structured, and then we let them run for a little period and review them again. There's no fundamental change proposed to the structure of these charges for this particular year.
Okay.
Probably just through the chair, just add as well is that also we would need to kind of compare what our revenue and financing policy looks like compared to the other councils, so that public-private split as well. That does have quite an impact as well on what fees and charges might be. All right. Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Steve. So my questions are around the parking, and I see that it's not being proposed to increase the parking fees, even though we're not predicting that the revenue that we would get from parking would meet budget. So I know it says that it's a rationale for not increasing it, but I didn't quite follow it. So could you explain?
Could I try to explain? Yes.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, the parking area is a vexed one, and it's one that you as a council have struggled to come to grips with at times from my perception. And I know that you're addressing it again shortly in terms of the overall framework and what we're trying to achieve through parking. We proposed last year that there be a one-off increase to the fees and charges for parking, for on-street parking, and that was approved by the council from 1 July. That's been in place now for a while, and then as we've mentioned, there are a few other things that have been at play in parking, and I'm not a parking expert, but there's a few other things that have been in play at parking, including the introduction by the government, some regulations that changed significantly some of the parking infringement regime, the fees. which I would have thought personally would have led to more people paying through the meter. There's also been work by our teams to improve our equipment on the ground, which again as well would have led to the revenue increasing. So in terms of where we're going in the current year, that's under investigation still by the staff, trying to better understand the position. And so in that, whilst we are still doing that investigation, I think it's inappropriate to be looking to just increase the fees right now.
Okay, well, my recollection, and it may be wrong, was that when we reviewed parking charges, that they hadn't been increased for several years.
That's true.
And that the direction of council was that we'd rather have a small increase every year than wait 5, 6, 7 years and then do a big increase. So I was expecting that we'd have a regular increase on an annual basis to avoid that scenario happening again.
Yes. Certainly I agree with you. There was a resolution of the council some years ago that there was a desire to increase the fees more regularly. We brought that paper to you last year to consider the changes that there were, and that was adopted. It didn't include specific provision that there would be a future increase in this current year. And when thinking about bringing this report to you, we did think, well, will we be recommending a change or not? And the decision on balance was, given where parking's at right at the moment in terms of our understanding of it and what's driving the revenue streams, we thought it better right now, at least, to not propose a change. It wouldn't stop the from at some stage, any time in the rest of the year, proposing a further increase.
Okay, well, I'll just signal Mr. Mayor that I'll bring in an amendment and test the room, see if there's any appetite for doing that. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Yeah, a few questions from me. Page 228 and 3.4 talks about the charges are increased by 3.4 to 3.7%. Now we're looking at overall a rates increase of 7-point-something% at this stage, it seems, and so that's only about half of the additional sort of cost of delivering services, it seems. My question is, if we're increasing our fees and charges only by half of what the overall cost of our services is increasing by, are the fees and charges portion of the revenue falling behind, and is that leaving more of a burden on the general ratepayer to fund some of those services rather than those using those services?
Yeah, that's a difficult balance. Certainly in terms of what we think are increases that can be supported by what we're showing as the cost increases in those particular areas where we do charge the fees and charges, then the level that we've proposed we think is supportable. We're not in those particular activities looking to make a profit. We're trying to get to have an appropriate share of the cost by the users. It seems to me that the council's overall rates increase is driven by a number of things that are not necessarily the things that relate to these particular activities that we're talking about increasing here. The council, in the majority of senses, many of these activities that we're having increases for are ones that are a very highly proportion of staff-driven costs, I suppose, as opposed to fundamental costs of infrastructure. There's not many of these services that are related to the investment we're making in infrastructure, per se. They're staff-related costs.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So given that there's also a number of these areas that you're proposing no increase for, what's the overall increase to the revenue from fees and charges that's proposed as compared to this current year?
Yes, look, I don't have that figure in front of me, I'm sorry.
Okay. And now just moving to page 265, the animal management fees and charges, under the pound fees for dogs, there appears to be no proposed increase, not even a CPI or 3%, or I'm just wondering, why that is the case, that there's no proposed increase?
Yes, I'll get the manager of that area to make a comment.
Hi, Angela Lumby, the Member of Environment Protection. Like Steve talked earlier, we did do a bit of an environmental plan around our pound charges, and we were at the upper quartile of our pound charges. So we made a decision based off some of that comparison work that we wouldn't look to increase them.
So is the cost of the pound not incorporated into what informs your thinking about what you propose in terms of fees and charges? Because previously the information that had come back to us appeared to indicate that because of the cost of the investment in infrastructure, that would require an additional revenue.
Perhaps if I can just try to answer that from the way I see it. In terms of the overall activity of animal management, and dogs specifically, I suppose, but animal management in general, the council's got a policy about the proportion that should be funded from fees and charges versus the rates contribution. And you'll remember that the policy was changed, the revenue and financing policy expectation was changed when we adopted the new policy last year. So what's being recommended is that levels of fees and charges which we believe will generate revenue that to the levels that's required to meet that policy expectation. There is no way any of the charges that can be made for the pound will anything like, for the pound alone, cover the costs of providing that facility. If you cover the fee and charges, just the people that use it, there's just no way that will be covered through the fees and charges. So it's a matter of then determining, well, what is an appropriate pound fee to have. And
Can I just get General Manager to speak to this, please?
Kerry Lee, General Manager, Development and Regulatory. The primary driver for not increasing the pound release fees is because we're concerned about having an adverse effect. If we put the pound fees up too high, we're concerned that less people will remove their dogs from the shelter, which will then lead to further costs in terms of housing them over longer periods of time. But we have increased the registration costs, you'll see, and that's where our primary revenue comes from.
Okay, thank you. Just moving to the resource recovery area, looking at page 278, and it talks there about the rubbish and public recycling rate to increase from $51 to $77, and the curbside increasing from $144 to $189, which is a 50% increase on rubbish and 31% increase on recycling. But the recommendation 9 says that there's no increase in fees proposed for resource recovery. I'm just trying to understand why the general rate is such a big increase, and whilst at the same time having no increase to the fees.
Yes, again, it's a sort of a bit of a balancing act here as to what the best thing to do is. The fees and charges, the biggest source of fees and charges from the sale of the rubbish bags, and those the staff are just monitoring, but the latest information that I had, I think that we're more or less on our budget expectation for the from those. Of course, there's a lot of volume predictions that are required to make an assessment of just how many of those we'll sell in any particular year. So the cost of that service, I think the staff believe on balance will be able to be covered appropriately with the bags without having to put the price up for this particular year. The other aspects of the resource recovery area, they've looked at each one of those and believe that that's okay. In terms of the overall activity itself, you, I think, or somebody did earlier in the meeting, asked a question about why the costs were showing up as being a lot more. A lot of it was to do with, one case was mainly the plant allocated that activity in a different way to what it had before, and so that now reflects in a public charge. So the public charge is about collecting the refuse from the public bins and those sorts of things, and for where people throw rubbish out in the countryside and all that type of stuff, and running the the centres. So those are things that where there's not necessarily a charge made for them. So that's why that's flowing through into the rate.
Okay.
And the recycling one is, there's a specific activity for recycling, and so the fee for that is covered through the rates, as you're aware. So the curbside recycling I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And my only other question is about the park having no increase, which it does. So thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Steve. Just following on from Councillor Nether's question around the overall percentage change in fees and charges year on year, could that information be brought back to us in the 5th of March report?
In the March report? Oh, yes, I guess so, yeah.
Great, thanks. Just want to understand what our total revenue expectation is for trade waste.
My recollection, it's in the order of $1 million, but I haven't got that figure right in front of me at the moment, but I can bring that.
So to contextualize then, the $50,000 or $60,000 amount that's talked about in 3.4 is then a relatively small percentage.
Yes.
Of
the total sum. Yes.
Of the total sum. Great, thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve and team. Just a couple of questions from me. If we start with page 249, perhaps Kerry Lee might be able to jump in here for the officers. I'm just trying to understand what a GIS inputting fee is.
Kia ora koutou, called Jeff Baker. I'm the Planning Services Manager. Through the Chair, GIS inputting fee is where we take a consent application and we simply input it on our GIS system or database, and it helps create efficiencies when you're looking at individual properties. So it's done on every single consent. And there's a multitude of efficiencies that come from it. It can be used for LIMS, it can be used for research and consents and that sort of thing. It's just part of good record-keeping practice.
Excellent. And so, Jeff, that's an actually internal system tool for the planning officers to use?
Yeah, that's right.
And the page 249 I was referring to, it's got GIS inputting per consent. Is that one GIS input per consent or for all GIS inputs for the same consent?
There should be one GIS input per consent for one. In some cases, you'll have multiple consents for one property, and as long as the parameters stay the same, there should only be one fee charged.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Jeff. If I just flick over the page to 250, and I'm going to go down to vehicle crossings. T1, T2, T3, inspecting an existing vehicle crossing, the charge is there $268 from July 25. Jeff, what does inspecting a vehicle crossing involve?
I think I'm happy to offer a comment on this on behalf of infrastructure. Chris, are you okay with that? I assume so.
Sorry, I was multitasking, I should.
Chris, I've just been asked a question about the vehicle crossing inspections. If you're happy, I'm happy to address it based on my knowledge.
Sure.
Yeah, so all new vehicle crossings require a permit. And once that permit is granted, there's an inspection fee for a staff member, an engineer, to go out and make sure it's up to our engineering standards. In some cases, in most cases, it's an inspection. In some cases, there needs to be more if they have to rectify a mistake or something like that.
Yep, understand that for new vehicle crossings. Thanks, Jeff. Then it takes me to my next question is, I can't see in there where there are multiple vehicle crossings in a resource consent application on a 30-metre stretch of road. So if there's 10 new vehicle crossings on that stretch of road for the consent, that'll be 10 times the inspections.
Possibly speaking a little bit out of bounds here, but if there's a given development and it's part of a subdivision, there's going to be multiple vehicle crossings. If they're done and poured at the same time, there's an efficiency for an engineer to go out and see a number at the same time because they'll be looking for the same thing. So if it's part of one contiguous development, my expectation, certainly when I used to be involved in these, is that it could be sort of all done under the one. But if they were 10 separate properties, not associated with each other, then they would have that fee.
Wonderful. Perfect answer, exactly what I want to hear. Done page 75, looking at water connections, number 3, proposed fee charges. Same question there, Jeff, if you're able to comment that in the existing, in the very same example of a subdivision, each water connection would be subject to each charge, similar to the vehicle crossings, like if all the water connections are done at the same time.
Yes, that's my understanding of how it's done, just with the caution that I now manage the staff doing these things as opposed to being in on the detail, but that efficiency should apply there too.
Wonderful. And the reason for all those questions was, is it possible that that information could be made available to the public as well? It's only because I've been working in this space and I picked it up and I thought, should we be letting our developer community know those sorts of things are available? Just a general question. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, noted.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First question, just in regards to, just picking up on the miscellaneous fees and charges, page 249. Can I understand what's involved with requesting a street number change and how many street number changes are requested on every year?
Again, I'm not immediately sure there's someone else here to answer that question, so I'm happy to take it for the team. Where there's subdivisions, we allocate street numbers as part of that process. And so that, my understanding is there is a fee, an administration fee for doing that, and that's done as part of subdivision process. Sorry, Councillor, was your question if it's outside of the subdivision process and the cost around that?
No, under the miscellaneous fees and charges, it's got a request for street number change, and it's not specific if it's involving a subdivision. So I think it's more general than under miscellaneous in the attachment B. Page 249 of our order paper, third one down.
Yeah, I think, extent to my knowledge, only goes to the subdivision process where predominantly all the street numbering is done because that's when you're creating new sections. I can't speak with any confidence about where it's outside of that process, and I notice it's a relatively high fee for doing so, so there must be a reasonable amount of administration involved there.
It would suggest, if I'm comparing it to the previous question around vehicle change, which is proposed at 495, that require an officer to way out just to check the numbers changed, or that's why I'm wondering what's involved. But I would have thought it would have been just an administration process.
Kathy's just advising me it's through the LIM process where you have to register a number Again, from my point of view, there's efficiencies done in terms of larger subdivisions when we do all the numbers, but I'm just simply not familiar enough with the process where it's not as part of a subdivision, sorry.
Okay. In regards to there was sorry, I might just go back a page. Yeah, in the planning and service charges on page 245, halfway down, and notwithstanding that it says the indicative charges and part of the charge will be refunded if work required to process the application is minimal, but the two categories halfway down is notified subdivision consents for up to and including 20 lots, and then the line below is more than 20 lots. Would I be correct in presuming that most subdivisions are 2 or 3 lot subdivisions, and wondered whether or not there could be a spread between up to 5 lots and then 5 to 20 lots, just to cater for that smaller, more likely application rather than giving a 20 lot subdivision, which is quite excessive and quite a large number?
Yeah, you're right, and there's actually relatively few subdivisions that are actually larger than 20. Very briefly, we did look at removing some of these lines because actually in practice, it's a cost recoverable system based on the individual circumstances of a given subdivision. So we charge as we go. I guess the legacy of these numbers is they were used to provide a sort of a guidance around what it might cost to process a subdivision of that scale. And that comes out of sort of requirements under the Resource Management Act. In practice, it would be possible to delineate various forms, 1 to 5 or up to 10 and that sort of thing. However, in reality, it's not particularly helpful because it's very difficult to compare. All horses are not the same in the race. Depends on all manner of things. Natural hazards on a given job could ramp up the fees dramatically. So those figures there were derived from a sort of averaging approach and are really just an indication to an applicant around what sort of costs you'd be in for. So in short, from my point of view, if I go down the sort of rabbit hole of really delineating lots of different things, I'm probably creating more work in explaining the issue to an applicant than what I need to.
Can I just flip that though from a customer perspective or a resident's perspective, that most would be a 2 or 3 lot, under 3 lot subdivision?
Yes.
That we wouldn't cater terminology and indicative costings around a more likely consent application for Joe Blogg's ratepayer than doing it for the big time developers, just to scare off the costs for those type of things and actually put a line that actually caters for the more likely application that we'll get?
Yes, I can see the merit of it, and we're doing some work in behind the scenes to be able to provide a more real-time cost to subdivision applications of a particular scale, so that if Joe Bloggs asked that question, how much would it cost to subdivide my section into 3 lots, we can line up a number of more recent ones to say, well, the average cost is 2,500 or whatever. It would be preferable to do that in real time based on the latest data, as opposed to the situation here where we are sort of locking into a policy which can become outdated depending on the sort of shifting government requirements we have. So it's possible to include it, but the preferable approach would be to provide more real-time data, which is something we're working on behind the scenes. Yeah.
A further question just on that, would we not have more that data available when you're saying we want more real-time data? Wouldn't most applications be for that smaller lot that we should be able to summarise?
Yeah, we have the data. The difficulty is where we go down the track of trying to distinguish. It's generalised, and my experience with consent applications is even the smaller ones it's not directly apples for apples. It depends on the merits of individual consent. So as planners, we're always at pains to separate, to qualify any statements around that. Sorry, I think Kira Lee.
Through the chair, just to add that the majority of mum and dad resource consents are non-notified, and they would generally be captured in that the activity type non-notified land use consent for that lower fee.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to environmental health service fees, which is on page 262. Can I understand the difference of what's involved with a change of ownership with a health licence versus a change of ownership for a hairdresser?
Kia ora, Angela Lumbey, Manager of Environmental Protection. The change of ownership for, excuse me, the health, it was health and hairdresser?
Health services, so the two change of ownerships I'm comparing is health licence and a change of ownership for a hairdresser. They're in the second section there on that page.
Where's the one you're comparing?
On page 262, in the second category, on the bottom two lines, there's a comparison for a change of ownership for a health licence. I guess what I'm just pursuing is whether we've got the fundamental figures aligned correctly before we even take increase, because I want to see the comparison of process.
I might jump in, please. The difference is that for the change of ownership for a health licence, we have to interact with MPI and we have to involve us. There's quite a bit of administration around the licensing and working with central government on that.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Oh, sorry, the last question just really was querying around delving down a little bit more on the burial and cremation charges. Just on our current policy, and it's historic, about having these standard fees being times on a Saturday by 1.5 and a Saturday afternoon by 2, whether or not we could take a view, review that view and actually have a standard charge and just work out our contracting for staff as a level of service across the 6 days rather than trying to leverage off a Saturday. I know that's operational, but it's for a member of the public that's is getting penalised here as the end effect.
Kathy Dever-Todd, Manager Parks and Reserves. The majority of cremations and burials do occur during weekdays. If we were to harmonise these, the majority of people would be penalised in order to pick up those additional operational costs. We work quite closely with our funeral directors who indicate that their preference, obviously as a business operating, is that we do have these additional charges, particularly for a Sunday. They do want a day off, so the feedback in the past has been that their preference is to operate a Monday to Friday business, and certainly that's where the majority of business comes through. A cremation or a service on a Saturday is very unusual. The normal thing that will occur on a Saturday or Sunday is a burial of ashes.
Accepting that, because that's probably a trend because people want to avoid the additional fees, but I just want to go down to fundamentals as a community member desire to have, you know, with the time of death and whatever, that Saturday with visitors from out of town and all that type of thing. Whether or not our operational approach could be that it's just seen as the same day service and that's an option for people.
It would be an option for people, but we would have to increase the overall fees to remove that additional fee because the costs of operation are in the weekends under our current employment arrangements with our staff.
Okay, well, I'll leave that as a question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
It was just to talk to the amendment, that's all. Do you want me to do that now?
We'll do that second. I'll just go to Councillor Naylor first. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I did just have one further question around the Conference and Function Centre, and that's on page 231. It's not clear, earlier in our papers, the increased revenue is only 18,000, but the increase in cost is 251,000. So I'm just wondering, it hasn't got dates on when that's being revised or next review schedule. So my questions are, with the increase in shortfall, what's being looked at to try and recoup some of those additional costs, and are we meeting policy with that? Because I think from memory last year, I think in the paper it said we weren't within our policy that activity. I could be wrong. So are we meeting policy, and what are we doing about the increase in shortfall that's now proposed 1.2 for shortfall Conference and Function Centre?
I can only talk to part of that question, but the increase in costs is, again, my favourite topic, the overhead reallocation. The venues and function is a big footprint and it has a fair number of staff, and that's some of the drivers of the overheads there. I can't talk to the policy question right there.
I had the policy stuff here in front of me, but I can't find it right at the moment. But my recollection is that it does not meet the policy yet, and that is, we talked about that at the council level last year, as you mentioned, and there is delegation to alter the fee structure there to the chief executive to do that, and that's been done, I think, relatively recently. It's done each year. So I'm not sure that I certainly can't add anything more to that unless the general manager of that area has got something to add.
So given that we're not meeting policy in that area and that's under the chief executive delegation, there's no decision that comes back to us today for this, but this is the only time I think it gets reported. What's being done to get that within the policy? Because I think last year the report said to us that work was being done to address that.
Through the chair, I'll just have to take that on notice, councillor, and look to bring that back to you we'll look to bring it back, the answer back to you prior to the March meeting as well.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go to Councillor Johnson's amendment. Yeah, as an alternative recommendation, yeah. So we can just get that up, please. That's the end of questions. Thanks, Steve. All right, Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, colleagues, I have put this up. I don't expect to be a vote winner, but nevertheless, I do think it's important that we maintain a policy of increasing parking fees annually, because we ended up in a situation where parking fees hadn't increased for very many years, and it was going to be too hard to increase them by the amount that we should have done after not doing anything for 5 or 6 years. And I have a strong recollection that at that time we decided that it would be much better to have a small increase every year than to wait several years and then have a big increase. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there are two ways of dealing with high rates on council. One is to reduce your spending, but the other one is to increase your income. And I would rather see us take a view of taking the opportunity where we can to make sure that user pays is happening across council services. It's appropriate to do so. So if we're increasing every other fees and charge in our long list of fees and charges, I don't see why we wouldn't increase parking as well. Thirdly, the anticipated parking revenue is significantly under what was budgeted for the year. So an increase would help make up the difference in that, presuming that it doesn't have an adverse effect on allowing people to park at all, which I doubt. And just finally, our parking is pretty cheap when you compare it to other councils. Napier is $2.50 an hour, New Plymouth is $3 an hour. I think if we moved up to $2.50 an hour, that wouldn't be at all unreasonable. So I'll ask for your support on this, and then we'll see how we go. Thanks.
Colleagues, look, I'm very happy to support this, and I'll just give you some reasoning why. I think this is small change, and actually the increase that we're doing here actually helps ratepayers in the longer run. It is user pays, and as Councillor Johnson said, we are the cheapest in the land. I just did some Googling to find out what some other councils were, and I'll start with Whangarei in the far north, $2.50. Hutt, $3. Dunedin, $3.50. Queenstown, $6. Tauranga, a city I know well, had free parking. That, depending on how long you stay there, it's up to $5. And I won't even go to Auckland, Wellington or Christchurch, so I don't think that's comparing apples with apples. But I think we are comparing apples with others there. As the councillor said, New Plymouth is $3, Hastings $2.50. We have much larger retail and retailer offering than them as well. So I think this is around user pays. I appreciate it's an increase, but actually the flip side is you just increase rates because we're not meeting some tight budgets, and we're providing a parking service for our sector as well. So it is a cross to bear, but I think if we don't do something, we're going to be faced with another decision, or another council will be faced with another decision in a year's time. And I think you're better to do some smaller, although it is 25, it is 50 cents at the end of the day. Okay, Councillor Wood.
Mr Mayor, could I ask a question of the mover? I want to understand the rationale for a 25% jump comes from, given the commentary of our officers was we had a big jump last year that was only 17.7%. So when all of our other fees are increasing around inflation, what's the rationale for a 25% jump?
Oh, sorry.
A number of things. The first one is that if you just do a CPI increase, it comes out to an odd figure, so that would make it difficult for the metering and all the rest of it to deal with. The second one is that when you look at the shortfall between the budgeted revenue and what we've had so far in the half year, the 50-cent increase would compensate for that shortfall in revenue. And thirdly, I looked at what other cities were charging, and it would still have us kind of middle of the pack or to the lower of what other cities are charging. So I don't think it's unreasonable. When you put it in percentage terms, it sounds a lot, but in actual fact, we wanted to increase it by more than that last time. And again, we kind of stuck to the round number thing. So it wasn't increased for 5 or 6 years, possibly before that, maybe longer. So I don't think it's unreasonable.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Brief question, possibly the mover or officers. From my read of it, we're on track to be about $500,000 adrift. And I'm just interested if we could get an indication of, if we had to fill that from rates, what the percentage increase in rates would be for that $500,000.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Can somebody answer that, please?
Yeah, about $500,000, probably looking at about 0.4% of rates.
Great, thank you. Just briefly, I do think that this is a prudent, although indeed probably not popular move, but the reality is public money does need to come from somewhere, and as we've seen in the evidence presented, we are behind a number of very comparable councils. I would add Hamilton to that example list as well. So I think it is a prudent move for us, and if it's this or pushing us up above 8%, we just had a really good conversation this morning about what we wanted to start with. Here's your chance.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just understand what it does note in here, the increase to the parking infringements were significant back in October, it's too early to be sure of what the outcome of that would be. Can I understand all those infringement increases the council receives, it doesn't get passed through to government?
My understanding it's shared, but I'll ask an officer that.
The the $200 infringement for warrant of fitness and registration is shared 50-50 with government. The rest comes to council.
Can I understand what the penalty current income is for infringements, the total amount that council receives? Oh, happy just to even increase. Can I understand what the penalty infringement fees are?
They're just doing some numbers in their head.
An estimate would be fine.
I'll tell you what, we might.
We'll come back to you on that. We're just quickly checking here and now for you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I was after.
Okay. Councillor Wood.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Barrett's questions have confused me a little bit, so I thought it was worth clarifying. My understanding was these fees and charges are assumed in our current draft annual budget, meaning if we were to do this, it would reduce the rates further, not pump the rates back up if we didn't do it. Is that correct? So, for example, if we were to do this, this would reduce it by 400,000, not be net neutral.
Steve Patterson. From my perspective, there is an issue we need to double check as officers in terms of our projections for the current year as to whether the increase would lead to any ability to increase our revenue assumption for next year or not. At the moment, the budgets have been prepared on the basis of a small increase in revenue over the current budget, but that would mainly relate to the stuff from infringements as opposed to the fees for the time. So we have to make this call, though, given where we're seeing the current year's revenue, as to whether there is any opportunity to increase next year's budget assumption if this figure was increased.
Thank you. That clarifies it.
Just an update on the infringements. It's around 0.3 million.
All right. Okay. I'll come back to you, Councillor. You need to write a reply? Okay. We're going to vote on the parking. Thank you. And that has passed 11 votes for and 4 against. All right, we'll go back up to number 1, that Council receive the report titled Fees and Charges Review presented on the 12th of February 2025, and note the current status of fees and charges. Okay, all right, then we'll do trade waste 2, and I'm going to move option A. And that Council agree for consultation on proposed updated fees and charges for trade waste services effective from 1 July 25 is attached in Appendix 2, amended with option A from Table 1 in section 3.4 of this report, and authorise Chief Executive undertake the necessary consultative process under the Act. Then 3 is around planning and miscellaneous, and again Council agree for consultation on the statement of proposal and associated summary for updated fees and charges for planning services and miscellaneous services effective 1 July 25. as attached in Appendix 3 and authorise the Chief Executive to undertake the necessary consultative process under the Act. Building, that Council agree the fees and charges for building services as proposed in Appendix 4 for public notification to take place from 1 July 25. Environment Health, that Council agree the fees and charges for environmental health services in terms of Regulation 7 of the health regulations as proposed in Appendix 5 for public notification to take effect 1 July 25. Animal Management, Council agree the terms the fees and charges for impounding of animals in terms of Section 14 of the Impounding Act, and for dog registration and dog impounding in terms of Sections 37 and 68 of the Dog Control Act, as proposed in Appendix 6 for public notification, take effect July 1, 25. Burial and cremation, that Council agree the fees and charges for burials and cremation as proposed in Appendix 7 for public notification, take effect 1 July 25. Service connections, that Council agree the fees and charges for service connections as proposed in Appendix 8, take effect 1 July 25. Getting towards the end, resource recovery, 9, that Council agree that no changes to fees and charges for resource recovery as proposed in Appendix 9. Parks and Reserves, 10, that Council agree the fees and charges for Parks and Reserves as proposed in Appendix 10 to take effect 1 July 25. Backflow prevention, number 11, that Council agree the fees and charges for backflow prevention testing and maintenance as proposed in Appendix 11 to take effect from 1 July 25. Corridor access request, 12, that Council agree fees and charges for corridor access requests as proposed in Appendix 12 to take effect 1 July 25. And that is it. I'm happy to move that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you to the Deputy Mayor. Whew. Okay, councillors, so if I could perhaps just start, I did have some commentary here around I might go to people to speak first. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and congratulations on your public reading skills. They're under heavy test today, and you've come through very well. I'd ask that we do separate two. My preference around two is we go with the alternate that is on papers. And my reason for that is that I think if there is one place where user pay makes total sense is in the trade space, and the recommendation as it sits on the screen would actually be pushing $50,000 to $60,000 subsidy out onto everyone else in the community. And while it's a relatively minor sum against 30,000 rating units, I simply do not see any rationale for asking for a cross subsidy from residential, etc. ratepayers onto trade waste. So it asks that we take that separately, and I'd urge colleagues to vote against it as presented and vote for the alternate, which would see trade waste costs being met by trade waste generators. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to speak briefly on the questions that I had for officers. I will seek to have a conversation with councillors after this and with our staff about whether we undertake a 3 or perhaps 6 yearly review benchmarking process of how our fees stack up against other councils. It doesn't run neatly with this process we're doing today, so I don't think it's worth doing an amendment or a motion here. But there are 3 reasons generally why another council might be charging more or less than we are. It could be due to their revenue and financing policy, aka there's a greater ratepayer subsidy in their community, which we can then compare to ours. Could be due to the unique circumstances of our council. For example, we have higher dog pound fees because we have a new dog pound, that makes sense. Or it could simply be inflation creep. And I suspect there are some fees in there that have just been slowly increased year on year, where we perhaps have creeped out of what is a reasonable range to charge for them. Officers have identified a few of those as we've gone through this process, but I think a formalised process where once every, say, 6 years, we just sit down, look at our neighbours and comparable TAs and make sure that we've got a sense check that we're in the right space. I did that just for 3 or 4 of those in here to get a sense of it myself, and it certainly felt to me like we were perhaps a little bit out of step in some areas, but there may be perfectly good reason for that. So I'll have a conversation with our team about where it would be appropriate to look at a motion like that. And just one question for Councillor Barrett. There's three options in the papers. There's option A, option B, and then there's the option where it is full carrying on with the process we currently have. So I just want to understand, and if we are to vote against option A, are you suggesting option B, or are you suggesting carrying on with the system we've got where the full? I'm getting a nod, so it's for not option B, it's for the full. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that I will also be voting against recommendation 2 in terms of the trade waste for a couple of reasons similar to what Councillor Barrett has outlined. I think I'm more comfortable with the user pays. But secondary to that, what we're agreeing on is what we will consult on. So we do have a second option if we were to hear back through that consultation that there was hardship and so suddenly to a new charge, then we do have that second option to revise down the track. So for that reason, I think it makes more sense to go with the option that is the first one in our papers. I'll be voting against the one that has been moved today.
I found my notes. Okay, so trade waste. I deal with this a lot because I get business customers coming to the CE or myself. In fact, we've had quite a few at us just recently. So just to put it in context, we're talking about a 95 or 97% recovery. This is upward of 29% for some of these customers on what we're already charging. So look, there's a real, we're good in this space. We've, although it is, a lot of our businesses understand the cost. This is a cost of doing business. I just put it out there that not many of our neighbours do this at all, and even some of our big cities that we benchmark ourselves do subsidise this. So we've got a policy of pretty well 100% recovery. And I can stand by that, but I can't stand by it when we actually are whacking on another 29%. So it's a complex issue. It's just not a simple, yep, we're just going to smash them out and charge them X what. It's formula driven. It's around what waste is being sent down the line. And we've got, in terms of what we do here, it's around laundries, food, dairy, science centres, those sorts of things. We don't have big meatworks. We don't have sawmills. We don't have a lot of what is in some other areas. And it's also what is being pre-treated. And I mean, I've had so many discussions with Mike and his team, and I actually got quite a good understanding of how the system works. Look, all of our trade waste customers understand the policy, and they understand that we need to recover those costs. But I'm absolutely positive you will get a response with what is already we're deemed at the high level. We will get definitely submissions if we progress to push out, and already another cost of 29% on top of those customers. So that's why I thought we'd go with option A. It is lessening the blow. They're still going to be in the 20% plus category of getting a cost increase. So I ask you to lessen the blow. This is the same conversation that we're having with our normal ratepayers. So these people are part of our community as well. All right, being no further comments, we'll do two first. So it's just on trade waste. And that is passed, 12 votes for, 3 against. All right. We're now down to the remainder, unless anybody wants to. No, you don't. Right, so we've got 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12, because we've already done parking. we'll vote for them in one group. So if there's no fear, I'll give these comments if you want to. No, lunch is beckoning. All right, we'll vote, please. And that has passed 13 votes for and 2 against. All right. Okay, all right. We're through to number 10 on our order paper. We've made good progress. Thank you, everybody. So we'll now break for a lunch, and we'll be back into the chamber at 5 past.